All right, so before we get started, here is the game plan. So as you already know, even at this point, there's no shortage of AI tooling and agents in the wild. And to be honest, it can sometimes be a little bit overwhelming. But that's okay. We're going to keep things super practical and super laser focused on the working PHP and Laravel developer. Let's get going. So with PHP and Laravel in mind, because tooling like PhpStorm is so widely adopted in our world, we're going to use Jetbrains AI. But don't worry, all of this knowledge is portable. Or in other words, 95, 96, 97% of what we're going to talk about here can be applied anywhere. All right, so let's scroll down. Of course, you're going to have access to AI completions directly within your editor, but you also have access to super powerful agents, which we'll talk about more in the future. But you'll start with JetBrains' own Junie agent, but you can also reach for Claude if you prefer. All right, and if I scroll down, here's an example of that interaction. Notice how the agent is creating a plan and sequentially working through that plan. It's very cool. We can also do updates, as you see here. Now, to get us going, we're going to use the Laravel workshop codebase that Simon, Jeremy, and I worked on together. So this will give us some good material to figure out what AI is capable of. All right, let's get going. So I'm going to start by visiting our settings. And let's come down to Plugins, Marketplace, and at the time of this recording, I'm going to look for AI Assistant. Alternatively, you might search for JetBrains AI, just in case they rename it. All right, so let's install it. And that's done. All right, so very quickly, though, you'll notice that it says purchased here. You don't have to buy it if you don't want to. Let's quickly talk about that. If I switch back to the landing page and scroll down to the plans section, yeah, you'll see there is a free plan that has unlimited code completion and local AI support, but it also includes a 1-month trial of their pro plan that gives you access to Junie and things like that. So take a look, decide for yourself. It's not up for me to tell you which one to pick. Anyhow, I will apply that. Okay, so now I can bring up AI chat by going to Tools in this one here. Works great. Alternatively, if you prefer, you can do it through the menu bar, as you see here, this icon. Next, if you prefer search anything, I could do it like that. Let's look for AI chat, or I'm sorry, AI assistant, and there we go. But generally, I'm sort of a keystroke guy, so this is what I would do. I'd once again bring up settings. I'd go to key map. I'd look for AI chat or AI assistant. And here you can see I've already added a keystroke of Option C, but you can add whatever makes sense to you. So now anywhere in my code base on my machine, I can press Option C to pull up the chat tab. All right, let's get going. So right away, we see a bunch of icons here. We see chat versus agents. Do we use Junie or Claude? What's the difference between an agent and chat? Again, it can all be a little bit overwhelming. And then for chat, we see all of these different models, and you're just expected to know which one you need to use. Well, I'm going to tell you the truth. Even people who do this all the time aren't entirely sure which one they're supposed to pick. And that's because things are a little volatile right now, and things keep changing, and models improve, and one surpasses the other, but 2 months later, the other one comes back and surpasses the former. Don't worry about it too much. So for now, here's what I want you to think about. You will see a distinction between chat and agents. Chat means exactly what you think it means. Chat with AI. Ask it questions. In this case, it's not going to do any work. It's just going to talk to you. And in many situations, when you are reviewing a code base, it's helpful to just have someone to talk to. Hey, this code looks a little weird. Why do you think it was done that way? Or in our case, maybe this is our first introduction, and we might say, can you give me a quick review of what this application does? This is a great example of using the chat. Now, for the model, you might just stick with auto, and JetBrains will do its best to choose a performant and cheap option. In this case, it's recommending Gemini 3. But if you know a bit more and you prefer a version of Claude or ChatGPT, you could reach for those as well. Do pay attention to the little icons here because they will give you an indication in terms of cost. All right, in our case, let's stick with auto and give this a run. So now literally what it's doing is it's collecting all the context it can. It's looking at your files. It's going to read the routes file. It's going to check if you have certain guidelines in place. It'll review the controllers and what tooling is being used, stuff like that. All right, and that's done. Took about 20 seconds. So here's a quick review. It's a social media platform, correct. Mimics Twitter or X, correct. It's built with Laravel and Vue and Inertia, again, all correct, providing a single-page application feel. All right, next, key features. It has a timeline and posts and likes and follows. Users can have profiles. We support authentication. For the backend, we're using Laravel 12. For the front end, Vue 3 and Inertia. For testing, we're using Pest. Again, this is just a great introduction to a code base if you are interacting with it for the first time. Now, in this case, again, I want you to notice that we're just chatting with AI. It's not actually writing specific code. So in those situations, you have to decide two things. First, do I want to be the agent? Or in other words, do I want to be fully in control every step of the way? I ask it to do a thing, and it does the thing, and then it comes back to me. Or am I okay with it functioning as an agent where it has a bit more autonomy? In these situations, I can tell it what I want, and it'll start making a plan, and it'll work through that plan sequentially, implementing the code. Are you okay with that? Or do you want to be in complete control every step of the way? The answer to that question will determine how often you reach for maybe the chat tab versus a dedicated agent. All right, so here's another example. This time I will switch to one of the agents. We'll go to Junie in this case. And you'll see a handful of menu options here that can be a little confusing, but they're super important to know. So first up, even in the context of an agent, you have the ability to simply ask it questions, right? Or, once again, it can be treated as a full autonomous agent that can get to work, or Junie can figure out what you want in this case. So you do have that option. All right, next, brave mode, again, is what you think it is. Is it okay if Junie is a little bit brave here? Is it allowed to write terminal commands without asking for permission? And you just have to decide for yourself. Are you okay with that? Or do you want to be in complete control where you have to manually approve every single command? My recommendation is, why don't you leave that one deselected unless you really know what you're doing. All right, and then finally, think more. Yeah, this is kind of a fun one. So as it turns out, if you ask AI to take a little more time and think a little bit harder, it will do better. Isn't that interesting? Even in a general web chat, if you say, think really hard about this, well, it's going to think a little bit harder about it, and it's going to give you better output. Just keep in mind, sometimes this will take longer, and there might be a cost associated with that. So only select this for situations where it's vital that the AI takes its time to really prepare the best possible response. Okay. Now, if we take a look here, it doesn't seem that AI is being referenced anywhere. And by that, I mean it doesn't look like Laravel Boost is installed, and I don't see any agents.md or guideline files for AI. So that might be a good first step for us. Now, I could write this out here, or you can pull in dedicated tools to convert your speech into text, and just have a Google for that. The one that I will be using here is called Whisperflow. And again, you can try it out for free. So now I can hit a keystroke, and you'll see it allows me to begin speaking. And when I let go of that keystroke, it will convert that into text. All right, so let's do this throughout this course. Perform a thorough review of this code base, including its structure and patterns, and then extract that into your own guidelines.md file for future reference. All right, so we'll give that a run, and let's see what it comes up with. All right, so almost immediately, it wants to run a terminal command to scan our project for PHP, Vue, and JavaScript files. But again, it's a terminal command, and it has to ask for permission because we don't have Brave mode turned on. So I will say, yeah, go ahead. All right, and that's done. So yeah, in real life, it took 3 or 4 minutes to complete, and that mostly consisted of scanning our entire project, reviewing it, figuring things out. What are the patterns? What are the style guides we use? What are the conventions? So it created a comprehensive guidelines file, documents the standards, the patterns, the testing, the code quality. You get the idea. Okay, so now you'll find a new guidelines.md file, or potentially you could place this directly within the Junie directory if you want this guideline to be unique and only accessible to Junie. So take a look here. We have a general style guide, so to speak, for our project. Here's what the tool is. Here is the tooling that we can reach for. And keep in mind, you can modify this to your heart's content. So if you see a section you disagree with, change it. If you want to make something explicit, maybe the braces should always go on the same line as the method signature rather than its own line. You can be clear about the rules that AI should follow when writing code on your behalf. All right, so next it picked up on the fact that we always use strict types, which means, again, when AI creates a new class on our behalf, it's going to know, all right, I'm going to include that because that seems to be a convention in the code base. Next, we can see type declarations, how rules might be declared, where we store our models, how we define relationships. You get the idea. If I bring up the outline here, notice it's quite comprehensive. What are the patterns for front ends? Let's take a look real quick. Well, we use view components, and this is where our pages are, and this is how we store layouts. Think of this literally as a guide for AI to figure out how it should go about implementing the code we ask it to write. Here are the best practices that it picked up for our code base. And once again, just to be crystal clear, you are in charge of this file. Make sure it reflects what you want. Okay. But yeah, I think you get the idea. So once again, we're calling this guidelines.md, but there's no hard rule at the time of this recording. You'll often see agents.md. This is a markdown file specifically for agents so that they can better gather context about how to proceed with what you want. And again, it turns out context is sort of a keyword. Keep it simple. Context is exactly the way you would use that term in real life. It allows the model to gather additional information in order to proceed, right? So in this case, the context is, well, when you work on my code base, this is how you should structure it. This is the style guide you should use. This is how you should prepare tests. Here's another one. If you wanted to always include tests as part of any feature it implements, you can be explicit here. On the other hand, if you're a cowboy and you just want to skip that part, well, you could tell it to skip the test as well, though I would not recommend it. And then further in terms of context, if I bring up our tab again, let's imagine you're working on the profile feature and there's something specific you want AI to do for you. Well, you can include the profile model in the context, just so you're crystal clear that here's what we're working with, here's the migration file, and based on that context, here's what I want you to do. So just as a general rule, the more information you give AI, the more equipped it is to execute the task. Now, we're still not done with context, so next up is Laravel Boost. So work along with me and visit github.com/laravel/boost. All right, so Laravel Boost, of course, is a Laravel-specific package. It's an MCP server, but don't worry about that right now. Basically, it provides additional context and power and capabilities to your AI agent. So the best way to explain this is to dive right in and try it out. Let's do it now. So first up, we're going to install it. And we can do this directly from my editor. So I will paste that into the terminal, give that just a second to complete. And now it's going to give us, among other things, 3 Boost-specific artisan commands. So if I run php artisan boost, it'll show us, well, we have install, MCP, and update. So of course, right now we want install. All right, php artisan boost install. And it's going to ask us a series of questions. All right, first up, do we want to install the herd MCP alongside Boost MCP? We don't know what MCP is at this point. For now, just hit yes. And until we talk more, and we have a dedicated episode on what those are, just think of it as a server that provides additional knowledge and capabilities to your AI agent. All right, that's good enough for now. Next, what editors are you using? Select all that apply. At the moment, just PhpStorm. Next, what agents? Remember, there's lots of different agents. Are we using Claude Code or Codex from the Facebook team, Cursor, Gemini? Choose all of them that apply. In our case, we'll stick with Junie and maybe Claude Code if you use that. All right, so now notice, as part of the installation, it's including guidelines. But these guidelines are dynamic, which means it's scanning our code base and our packages to determine what we're using here. And then if it has associated guidelines, it pulls those in. So in our case, we're using Laravel 12, and notice we have Laravel 12 guidelines. We're using inertia.js, so we have inertia guidelines. We are using PEST PHP instead of PHP unit, so once again, we have PEST-specific guidelines, and again, those guidelines instruct AI for how it should go about writing that code. All right, best practices as provided by the creators of these tools. All right, so next we have everything all set to go. So if I run a git status, you'll see that we have a handful of files that we can interact with. Okay. All right, so let's take a look. If I open up the sidebar, I now have a .junie directory, and here's a guidelines file, but this time it was created specifically by Laravel Boost. And again, just to reiterate, it's dynamic based upon what we have installed. So here's the tooling that AI now knows about without having to manually scan our project. Next, you'll see all of the various guidelines here. So let's go down to, how about inertia? We're using inertia here, and Boost wants it to know, well, this is where we place our pages. This is how you should render an inertia page. We have code snippets, and then look at this section right here. Use search docs for accurate guidelines on all things inertia. All right, so now you're thinking, well, what is search docs? Well, search docs is sort of like a skill that the MCP server provides, right? Remember I said MCP provides knowledge and capabilities? Well, those capabilities could be referred to as skills. And in this case, one of those skills is to search the documentation without having to scrape the web and pull up blog posts and things like that. No, now it can use this skill to get the most up-to-date documentation for the very version of the package that you're using. That's really cool. Next, let's keep going. It's going to let it know, hey, don't try to do any inertia 1 code here. We have inertia 2. Here are the things it supports. And if you need to, for example, pull my server, don't wire up your own version here. We have this out of the box. And again, if you've ever run into this in the past where AI is using outdated methodologies to solve a problem, well, things like this really do help. Now we can instruct it that, hey, no, we're using inertia 2, and make sure you review the features. Here's the documentation if you need to learn more via that skill, and this is how I want you to behave. Got it? Cool. So anyways, let's come back. Here is the MCP servers. This is how we register these servers with your agent. In this case, for Junie, notice, and don't be overwhelmed here. This is very simple. We have an MCP server for Laravel Boost and Herd. And notice it's just specifying, well, we're going to run PHP, and then we're going to run Artisan, and then we're going to run Boost MCP. So this is effectively PHP Artisan Boost MCP. And in fact, you can run this directly from the command line to start up your MCP server. But now this is a way to instruct the agent how to start it up on its own. And then we also have one for Herd. All right, so cool. I think we're all set to go here. All right, so now the final step is to simply enable these MCP servers. So open up your settings, look for MCP, and yeah, down with Junie, if we're using that, let's make sure we enable these. I'll click apply, and if you're working along, make sure the status is green. If it's red, that means for some reason the server didn't start up properly. But sure enough, if I hover over this, we'll see, yep, these tools are now available. Okay, so let's try it out. Behind the scenes, I have created a route for the home page that instantly throws an error. And I've already triggered that error, so if I go into my log file, sure enough, we can see beep, beep, alert, alert, failure. So here's what I want. I want AI to inspect this log, determine the reason for that error, and then fix the bug automatically. Let's go. All right, so let's open our chat. We're going to use the Junie agent, and let's speak it out loud once again. The last time I loaded the home page, an error was thrown. I'd like you to read the application logs and fix the bug. Thank you. All right, so let's give it just a second, and we're going to watch what happens here. Take a look at this. Run MCP commands. So yes, otherwise, without Boost, what it would probably do is try to tail the laravel.log file, and that wouldn't work. But again, just notice that we're providing better capabilities, more efficient capabilities to the agent. So it's saying, hey, I want to use this MCP server, and I want to run the read log entries tool. Yeah, go ahead. All right, it revealed a critical error. Yes, it was a critical error. And it's going to fix the bug now. All right, so now it's going into home controller. It's kind of a good learning opportunity as well to figure out how do I debug things if you're at the beginning of your career. So it goes into home controller and it reads that action and then sees, oh, well, it was throwing an error. So it's going to change the file. I examined the controller and I found a deliberate throw statement that was causing the error. Removing it fixed the bug. It's always amazing when just removing the error fixes the bug. So notice we have our plan that it creates on its own, and it fixed the error. So if I were to close this out, sure enough, if I go into, what was it, home controller, you'll see, yep, it removed the error and it fixed the bug. You get the idea. Here's some other things you can do. Let's create a new chat, and we're just going to have a conversation for now. So I will be explicit that we're only asking the agent. We'll say, what routes are available in my application? Right? So once again, without Boost, it might try to scan your routes file. It might try to trigger an artisan command through the terminal, but in this case, it can instead defer to a list routes tool. So we give that a run. It retrieves the routes, and now it's preparing the response. All right, here we go. So we have a big, massive list of routes that we don't need to take a look at right now. All right, let's do one more together. So we have this home controller, and it loads the home inertia page. This is mostly just kind of generic, just a generic splash page. But why don't we do this? Why don't we say, well, when the component mounts, I'm going to do a console.error. And once again, we'll say beep, beep, browser issue. All right. So yeah, if I have Vite running behind the scenes and I run this in the browser, sure enough, if I bring up the inspector and I go into console, yep, we're going to see beep, beep, browser issue. Okay, so let's have AI fix this issue as well. When loading the home page, I noticed in the console there was an error related to beep, beep. I'm not sure why. Can you read the browser logs and fix the bug for me? All right, let's get going. All right, once again, it's going to use the browser logs tool. All right, it revealed a local error. It knows to check the home page component. It found a console.error in the mounted hook. It fixes it, and now it understands that maybe you need to rebuild the project. Notice it knew what the command was. It might be able to figure that out on its own, but we have a guideline for it to let it know how to build our assets. All right, and now, once again, the bug is fixed. Back to the browser, give it a refresh, open the console, and we already know, ignore this, that's just related to an old GIF. But the main error is now gone, which is great. So yeah, all of this factors into the context that we present to AI. And again, just to reiterate, context refers to all relevant data and information and knowledge that we provide to the AI. So this would include the chat itself, of course, the chat history, the project, the files that we explicitly reveal to AI, and of course the MCP servers that we install. That provides essential guidelines and context for the AI to make the best possible decision. So the next tip I have for you is to nip it in the bud. And here's what I mean. If at any point AI generates some code or doesn't adhere to a convention that your team has, stop, take 30 seconds, and then update your guidelines file. I know it's kind of annoying, but just do it to ensure that this never happens again. I'll show you an example. Here I'm in the Laravel workshop project. You can search for that on Laracasts. And at the end of the series, we added a README with some potential suggestions if you want to take it further. Let's do the first one on the list. Implement the bookmarking feature. When the user clicks a bookmark icon, the user ID and post ID field should be inserted into a new bookmarks table that we create. All right, add the ability to bookmark a post effectively. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to select this entire thing, and we're going to have AI work on this, but I want to show you something. I want to work on a new bookmarking feature. Review this plan, and I'll paste that in here. And then I just wanted to do plan mode. I want you to give me some examples for the eloquent model that you will create for this particular feature. Don't write any code yet. Okay, so let's let it run. And I want you to notice, by the way, that I am using the Claude agent here. All right, let's have a look. Here's the full bookmark model I would create. So bookmark extends model, we have the relationships, sort of what you'd expect, but I want you to notice this section right here, the fillable fields. Now maybe for your team this is what you want, but for my team, we don't do this. We call model unguard across the entire project, in which case this is not following my conventions. So, of course, it takes 2 seconds to delete that, but I don't want it to ever do that again. So here's what I'd do. I'd close this out. And if I'm using the Claude agent here, then I would open claude.md. If I were using a different agent like Junie, then I would open up the Junie configuration file. And that would be within the .junie guidelines file, and I would update it there. Anyhow, in this case, we're using the Claude agent. So yeah, you'll notice there's no reference here to fillable fields or guarding. So I want to add my own rules, and I'm going to show you 2 ways to do that. First up, let's imagine I'm not using Laravel Boost at all. In that case, maybe I might even have a blank claude.md file, and I could say eloquent, and I'm just going to give it some brief instructions here. How about this? Never use fillable or guarded fields. We run model unguard application wide. All right, and in fact, if I go to app service provider, you can see right here, it says model unguard. Okay. That's it. So now we've updated our guidelines to instruct AI, or Claude in this case, to never use those properties. Okay, so let's bring this back. Try one more time while reviewing claude.md guidelines. All right, here we go. Perfect. I see the important guidelines. Let me revise the bookmark model. So now I want you to notice it omits the fillable fields entirely. And this is what we want. So here's the deal. You're going to rinse and repeat. You're going to follow this exact step every single time you run into even the smallest of paper cuts. If something's not working, then you need to fix it. Okay, so if you're starting with a blank claude.md configuration file or guideline file, this is fine. However, if you are using something like Laravel Boost, then this file will be generated dynamically. In that case, here's what you do. I want you to open up your sidebar, and you're going to create a new directory called .ai. And within there, create a directory called guidelines, and then add a series of markdown files, each of which will effectively be appended to the top of this claude.md file. So I'll show you. Let's go right here and fix the typo. And let's add a file. We'll call it laravel.md. And I'm just going to paste this in here. Okay, so now I've added custom guidelines. But of course, it's not magical. This doesn't get updated automatically. That will only happen when we run boost install. So let's do that now. PHP artisan boost install. All right, and we can see right up here, that's working. So now, if we scroll to the top of this file after it refreshes, you can now see that it is appended to the top of the file. All right, so yeah, just as a general rule of thumb, if you're using Laravel Boost, well, when you fix these paper cuts, always update your .ai directory instead of rewriting this file, because of course, it's going to be overwritten as soon as you run boost install a second time. All right, next up is prompting essentials. That's what we're going to call this video. So here's the deal. You can browse the web and find dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of best practices, so to speak. But from my experiences, this whole thing is evolving as the models mature. And what was a best practice a year ago, you don't necessarily need to do anymore. So I'm not sure how helpful it is if I tell you 48 best practices. But I will tell you 3 core patterns that you should get in the habit of. The first technique is to be explicit. And this is precisely why voice-to-text tooling can be so incredibly helpful when interacting with AI. It encourages you to be a little more verbose than you otherwise might. And this is a good thing. So for example, if I were not a programmer and I was working on this Laravel workshop application, remember it's basically a Twitter or X clone, maybe if I wanted to add a bookmarking feature, but I wasn't a software developer, well, maybe I would go to AI and I would say, add bookmarking. And you know what? the AI is decent, right? The agent will review the context and it'll figure things out. It'll look at the application information as you see here, and it won't do the worst job in the world. But again, you're a programmer, right? Maybe the way you interact with AI should be just a little bit more mature than the way, for example, my daughter or my young son might interact with it. Okay, so with that in mind, why don't we abort this entirely and instead rewrite it? Now, here's a little tip. You may find that it's actually a little difficult to be explicit because you haven't yet fully thought through the feature. And that's okay, no judgment. We've all been there. But in these situations, maybe take a moment and AI can still help us out. And here's how. I'm going to switch to the Ask section. We're not writing code yet. We're brainstorming with the AI. And let's do it. Let's ask it to help us prepare a prompt. I'm thinking about adding a bookmarking feature to this application, and I would like some help preparing a detailed prompt. So here's what I know so far. I know that I want a bookmarks link in the main sidebar. Next, every single post should offer a button that, when clicked, bookmarks that post for the current user. Next, there should be a dedicated page to view all of my bookmarks, and that's what that bookmark link in the sidebar should direct me to. And then finally, I think we should make bookmarks private. I can view my own bookmarks, but I shouldn't have access to any other user's bookmarks. Can you help me work on the prompt for this? All right, so there we go. We're going to give that a run. And here's what I want you to notice. At this point, I'm not thinking, what are the best practices for prompting I need to include here? No, I'm just talking to it the way I would talk to a real human. It's going to evaluate this, help me. It might suggest some things. And then at that point, once I have figured this out a bit more, then I can get started on the feature. All right, so it's going to take a look at our application details. Fine. It wants to take a look at our database schema. All right, and already that's getting to work. So while this wraps up, I want you to notice how this works and the way an agent behaves. It's not like it does everything in one go. Instead, it's kind of recursive. It will take what you're asking and try to solve the first question. And then once it has solved that question, it moves on to the next thing. What's the next thing I should do? Okay, that's done. Now, what's the next thing I should do? And it keeps calling itself recursively, which is kind of cool. And it's a good way to think of it. Anyways, that seems to be done. So let's go full screen and see what it came up with. All right, so let's take a look. We want to implement a bookmarking feature. Here are the requirements. And notice the requirements are quite extensive. It's a full document, and this is great. At this point, I could go over all of it. I can tweak it. I can decide if I like the suggested API that they have here. What do I think about the routing URIs? Should there be certain relationships? This is really excellent, I think. Okay, so now, of course, I'm not going to do this as part of a video, but I could copy this whole thing, tweak it, and then use that as part of my prompt for the actual feature. Next up is technique number 2. Think small and show examples. All right, so in the first technique, we were rather broad, weren't we? We gave it the full feature request, and we worked on that prompt to make it as targeted and explicit as possible. However, what you might prefer to do is to break that feature into tiny little miniature features that AI helps you with. That way you remain in control and you remain the architect every step of the way. So in this case, let's do this. Let's get started. I want to begin working on a new bookmarking feature. Let's create a new Git branch for this. And to start, I need a migration for a bookmarks table. I need a bookmark eloquent model. And let's see, the bookmarks table should consist of a user ID, a post ID, and timestamps. Yeah, so from this point of view, I'm almost treating AI like my workhorse, my assistant here. So it creates a new branch. It's going to create the model for me. All right, and while that's doing its thing, it looks like it updated the migration. So let's just take a look at that right now. Create bookmarks table. And notice it has the user ID and the post ID and the timestamps. Great. Now it looks like it's trying to scan our models. Perhaps it's going to add some relationships for us. Yeah, keep that in mind. It's not always going to stick precisely to what you ask. There are some prompting techniques to help with that, but even still, sometimes it's going to do its own thing. All right, and that's done. So we can see everything that's been done here. Created a handful of files. And by the way, if we ever want to undo everything, we can click this rollback button here, which is actually incredibly helpful if you want to take a second stab at it. Okay, so now at this point, I have a bookmark model. I, of course, have a create bookmarks migration. And then finally, we have a bookmark factory that contains all of the relevant attributes here. So with that, let's move on to technique number 3. My final technique for you is to offer the agent a way to verify completedness. And often a good way to get started is through a test, of course. So let me show you. Let's create a new test using pest, and we'll call it bookmarking test. All right, so I can open that up now. All right, so this will mostly be a model test. A post can be bookmarked by a user. All right, and now, yeah, we're just going to write the API that we would love to have, right? So I could say something like, given I have a post and a user, if I call user bookmark post, then that should be reflected in the DB, right? Something along those lines. So I'm going to interact with this code the way I want, but it's not actually going to work yet because we haven't written that logic. That's where the AI will take over and implement my requirements. All right, so let's say we have a post. We'll create a factory for one. Next, let's create a user. All right. Next, if I call user bookmark. So notice in this case, I'm just going to interact with that method in that API, even though it doesn't exist. Great. User bookmark post. And then what is my verification? And this is really important. This will determine whether or not the feature has been implemented the way I would expect. And now, yeah, of course, we could do a database check. So I could say, well, I assert that the database has within the bookmarks table a record like this. Right? So yeah, this is kind of the, I don't know, the manual way we could do it, but it doesn't really verify the API itself. But yeah, we could keep that if we want, if it would help the agent. I could also do something like, well, let's grab the user's bookmarks. And I'm going to expect for that to have a count of 1, right? These are the things we can do. So again, none of this works, but it will work in just a minute. So let's open up our agent, create a new chat. I'm going to give it some additional context, which is the current file. And here we go. So I'm still working on this bookmarking feature. Have a look at bookmarking test, where I have created a test to describe the API that I would like. Your job is to implement it, and you will know that you are successful when the test returns green. Just keep in mind that you should never hard code values just for the sake of making the test pass. It should always work in a general way, in addition to the test returning green. All right, so once again, maybe a little jumbled in my speech there. I could clean it up, but I don't really have to. This should be clear enough. So let's go. All right, that's done. So let's take a look. If I expand this, it updated, looks like 3 or 4 files, and it implemented the test. So let's have a look. Let's give it a run, and it returns green. Kind of amazing, right? So if we have a look at the relationship, sure enough, it knew to add this, and then it creates one, sends through the post. On the post, it adds the fillable fields if you like. And by the way, if you don't like that, then of course your guideline can be explicit that we are unguarding our attributes. But yeah, here's the key thing to be aware of. With this approach, I think of it sort of like developer-driven AI. We remain in control the entire process. It's almost the polar opposite to vibe coding, right? And it doesn't mean vibe coding's bad, not by any stretch. It's just a different way of doing things. With vibe coding, you're hitting approve, approve, approve. Yep, it's good. I don't care what the code says. Yep, yep, yep. Keep going, right? With this approach, no, we remain in control. We want to know what the API is. We want to define the interface, and then the AI is simply our assistant who will implement it for us. Let me know what you think. Now, as a developer myself, when it comes to vibe coding, I don't necessarily want to use it for my real code and my real projects and things that actually make me real money. I feel a little uncomfortable with that, at least right now. However, where I do very much enjoy it is for personal software. And when I say personal software, I'm referring to tools and tasks and software that is meant for one person, this guy right here. In these situations, I genuinely don't care what the code looks like. I will never distribute it. I will never ask you to sign up. I will never sell it to you. It is only for me and a particular need that I have. Yeah, in those cases, I think vibe coding is actually spectacular. So with that in mind, I have a particular, unique, weird, random need that I'm going to vibe code. Come along. I'm going to call it real. All right, so this is a strange one. Come along, but it should actually be fairly easy to implement. So no starter kit, pest if we have any tests, and I do want Laravel boost. If we have a database, which I don't think we will, SQLite would be fine. For my code editor, we're just going to stick with PhpStorm here. And usually I would stick with like Junie or Claude code. Yes, install my dependencies. And let's cd in there and open this up in my editor. All right, here we go. So let's bring up the terminal, and I will initialize Git, just in case I need to roll anything back. Now, ideally, the point is I will mostly just approve just about everything as long as it works. But nonetheless, it might be useful. So I'll say initial commit. All right, so here's what we're building. It's a weird one. So as it turns out, I'm a really big fan of this video game called Outer Wilds. It's the only information-based video game I've ever played, which means there's no fighting, you're not killing anyone. And as it turns out, if you can gather all of the information you need, you could actually complete the game in 15 minutes from the very beginning. But the whole point of the game is to travel around and figure out what it is you're supposed to do and what happened to these aliens that caused them to disappear so long ago, right? It's so much fun. It's a spectacular game. Anyways, as part of the DLC, you travel to this new area, and I don't want to have any spoilers, but I do want you to play it if you're interested. And you're trying to once again figure out what happened, and you watch these reels and slides that guide you to different locations. And then you go to the locations and you find a little more information, and that will guide you somewhere else. So I'm going to do this very thing for a present for my son. And we're going to do it in the form of sort of like slideshows where he will visit a website and he will have a series of photos that guide him to a particular location where he can get more information. So one of those websites we're going to build together. Let's go. Just come along. It's weird. Come along. All right, so let's get started. I'm going to bring up Jetbrains AI and I'm going to speak it out. And this might take a moment or so. And I might be a little sloppy, but that's okay. This is real life. I'd like you to build a one-page website that has the sole purpose of displaying a slideshow of photos. Now, this should be perfectly centered. It should be optimized for mobile and incredibly minimal. Don't reach for more UI than is necessary. At any given time, we should only see one photo. And when we click a next and previous button below the photo, it will take us to the next photo in the array of photos that we have available. If we reach the end, it should cycle back to the beginning again. To reiterate, I only want a single photo on the page, perfectly centered at a time. I want to cycle through the photos as I click those buttons. Now, in terms of tooling, I do want to use View 3 and Inertia 2. And I'd like, for any components you might need, for us to reach for the shadcn UI package. So get started, use a dark theme, and ask me any questions you need to as you prepare your plan. All right, so again, notice like I kind of jumbled my words a little bit. That's okay. In real life, I might go through here and tweak anything. For example, I believe the website is shadcn-view. Package, it can track that down. Okay, let's go. I'm excited to see what it does here. All right, and fairly quickly, it has a handful of questions. Before I create the implementation plan, I have a few questions. The photo source, of course, we have to reveal the photos. Where should they come from? Next, in terms of the setup, I notice View 3 and Inertia are not yet installed. Should I install them? Okay, we will clarify that. For the photo dimensions, should we scale to fit? Yes. Should we have a maximum width? Yeah, this is very useful. And notice it's asking these questions because I was clear that I wanted to ask me questions. Remember, sometimes you have to be verbose in your instructions, or sometimes it'll just figure it out for you. And often it'll do something that you don't necessarily want. All right, so here's what we're going to do. First up, I'm going to copy over the assets. So I have these stored within my home directory, and I think I call them, outer wild assets, and I'm going to move it into an assets directory within this project. Okay, so if we take a look real quick, now I have assets, and we have some slides and some background music. So actually, with that in mind, why don't we just take both of these and move them into my public directory? All right, next, I'm going to answer these questions, but I'm not going to make you watch. So I will answer them and then review them with you and quickly submit it. All right, so I've answered these questions, and very quickly, here's where the photos are stored. They're numbered. Because we're vibe coding here, I don't care too much about manually installing things. But just note, for real life and for real projects that are not vibe coded, generally my approach is just to manually install whatever tools I want AI to reach for. But in this case, it just doesn't matter. And then finally, photos can be a maximum of 1200 pixels or 90% of the viewport width, and that will handle mobile optimization. And then finally, the navigation buttons can just be icons. So I'm going to turn on Brave mode so I don't have to approve everything. And again, I just don't care too much. And I will give this a run. All right, it looks like it's done. So I'm not going to lie, I'm a little bit excited. It's always fun. You never know. Are you going to get something incredibly impressive or not quite right? And don't forget, in terms of the code itself, the entire philosophy is we don't necessarily care what the code looks like. But of course, as programmers, sometimes it's fun just to take a look. So it has a slideshow here. It somewhat verbosely is reading those files and sending that through to a slideshow component. The slideshow component is using the composition API. Very good. It's getting that from the Boost guidelines. It accepts some photos. It tracks what the current one is. It has buttons to increment it, basically. It is using ShadCN. So notice it's pulling in a button component that is, again, provided by ShadCN, as you see here. Not necessarily needed, but just for fun. It looks good. So I'm going to take a look in the browser. Okay, so if we load real.test, immediately I can see an issue. The photo is simply too large. And maybe this is my fault because I think it did honor my requirement. Notice the photo is 1200 pixels, but maybe I should have been clear that I still want to contain the entire photo within the viewport. So that's something we should fix right now. All right, back to the editor. I checked the website, and the first thing I noticed is that the photo is simply too large. So yes, you maintained a maximum width of 1200 pixels. However, I want to display the entire photo within the viewport without the user needing to scroll. All right, let's see if it can fix the issue. All right, that's fixed. So if I switch back, perfect, nice and easy. All right, so now you can see how this works. So we have these like owl/moose-like creatures. And the way this works is I actually photographed my wife in real life, and then we swap her out with a version from the game. Okay, so now I can cycle through here, and you can see there's a blue lockbox, and we hand it to him, and he goes up the stairs, okay, and he goes into the green room, and then he opens something, and then it repeats, right? So you get just a glimpse of, there's a lockbox here, and where did it go? It looks like it got put into this secret compartment area. And then he will find that, but then he also needs a key, and the key will be located somewhere else, and he has to gather these clues. That's the way it works. Okay, so this is working, but next I want some creepy background music. So that's my next step. Great. I'd like you to add background music now to add a bit of mood. When the page loads, we should instantly start playing the background music, and you will find it within the public directory. I believe it's called bg-music.mp3. All right, good enough for me. Let's see if it works. All right, and that's done as well. So let's scroll up and we can see an audio element with autoplay and loop attributes was successfully added to the slideshow component. So let's look for audio, and there we go. It's referencing that file, it loops, and it automatically plays. So let's try that one out now. So we reload, but you know what? It's not going to work. And I think this is because modern browsers will, by default, mute audio like this just for better I don't know, security and user experience. It's a little annoying in this case, but it's probably a good idea to mute it. So let's see if we can fix this. Let's switch back and continue. I don't hear any audio when the page loads, and I assume and imagine this is related to browsers automatically muting it by default. So can you find a way to trigger it, perhaps with the press of the initial next button? Maybe that triggers the audio. And again, notice like I'm jumbling my words. It's okay. Usually it will figure out what you want to do there. All right, so hopefully that fixes the problem. Let's give it a shot. So now when I refresh and hit the next button, that will start and keep the audio going. Let's go. And then it resets, right? Really fun, right? So yeah, in this case, we have to have a user interaction to trigger the audio. By default, the browsers are going to mute it because otherwise, websites will just get incredibly annoying. All right, so this is actually a really good example, by the way, of how having some existing programming knowledge is incredibly helpful even when you're vibe coding. Otherwise, if I have no experience, the best I can do is constantly lean on the AI. And all I can do is say, hey, didn't work. Sorry, I don't hear anything. Didn't work. Try again. But because I have some experience, I know how the browsers act, and I can say, hey, I think this might be the reason why we're not hearing anything. So why don't we hook into a click event so that we have a user interaction to start the audio, right? It's incredibly helpful, even when you're vibe coding and you don't necessarily care about the code being written. All right, so now I just want to finish up with one more thing. I have a background forest image here, and why don't we see how that looks as the backdrop for our slideshow. So let's go. This is looking very good. So finally, I have a bg-forest.jpg file within my public directory, and let's see how that looks as the background for the entire web page. Now, I'm thinking that image might be a little too prominent, so perhaps we should lower the background opacity to 25% or so. Next, for the background image, maybe contain it or have it cover the entire page. I don't want any awkward borders where the image cuts off. All right, maybe a tiny bit verbose, but it's fine. It should work. All right, that's done. So let's take a look. And yeah, I mean, we're not going to win any design awards, but this looks good to me. So now we have our mood, we have our slideshow, we have our background music. I think this is complete. Okay, so now here's what I would do in real life. I'm going to push this up to a Forge server I have. That's going to give me a free onforge.com URL, and I will then share that with my son as part of one of his presents. Remember, there's multiple clues that he has to open. So he opens a present, and he sees a mysterious web page URL, and when he visits that on my phone, he has a slideshow that leads him to the next clue. Okay, so in the last episode, we vibe coded a project from scratch. And again, that's incredible for things where you genuinely do not care about the code quality at all. It's irrelevant. But now, in this episode, we're going to take a slightly different perspective. I think of this more as developer-driven AI. Come along. So here I have a fresh installation of Laravel. And yeah, for this demo, here's what I want to do. Let's set up a Telegram bot so that we can interact with our application through a Telegram chat. Let's get going. We'll start with Junie here. I'd like to set up a Telegram bot for this application. And here's how I imagine it working. I start a chat with a bot that we create on Telegram, and when I send it a message, that message is posted to a webhook on my server. The server receives the message, and it parses it to determine which action to take. It performs that action, and then it replies or returns a response to my Telegram chat. So I want you to start working on a plan for this, and then we'll get started. Okay, so this is fine for the initial plan, but I'll give you a little tip. Often when you're working on features, Sometimes it can be cumbersome to go through the chat. So often what I will do is this. Once you have a plan, I want you to write the contents of that plan to a file called telegram.md within my project root. Okay, so yeah, it's just going to make a plan and write it to a file so I can review it with a fine-tooth comb. All right, that seems to be done. So it has a detailed Telegram bot implementation here. And let's go over this together. All right, we'll do this side by side. Hi. Telegram bot implementation plan. All right, architecture. User sends a message to the bot. Telegram sends a webhook. Good. Laravel recognizes, validates the webhook. Application parses the message. Good. It executes the action. So it parses it, figures out what are we trying to do here. Are we refunding an account? Are we sending a coupon? Are we updating a record or something? Executes the action, sends the response, user receives the response. That's the flow we want. All right, so here are the implementation steps. And yeah, this is where it's different from vibe coding, by the way. With vibe coding, to a certain extent, you just don't care. It's like whatever it makes is what it makes. If it works, it works. And if it doesn't work, then you update the chat and you say, that didn't work, right? This is a little different. I want to be involved every step of the way. I don't want the code base to end up in a state where I do not understand any of it. I very much want to avoid that. So before it writes any big feature like this, I'm very much involved. I'm going over every step. I'm reviewing what the controller name is, what the route is, how it goes about it. Are we using caching? Which package did we pull in? I want to be involved every step of the way. Okay, so anyways, implementation steps, create a new bot. This is correct. Save the bot token, fine. So it's like a token to interact with your Telegram bot or the API. Set up a webhook, correct. Okay. Store webhook secret, all right. Okay, so now we're just setting up environment variables, fine. Database schema, so they're actually storing this within a database. Yeah, so this is another good example. Like I didn't necessarily say that I want to store the chat within a database. That might be useful for the future, but I didn't ask for that. It's just making assumptions, which is why we start with a plan before the AI gets to work. All right, because I don't necessarily want a database here. All right, next, API routes. That's fine. Yep, that's what I would do. No CSRF protection. That's why you put it within your routes/API file. That's good. Here's your webhook controller. Fine. Middleware. So it wants a middleware that basically validates that the request is coming specifically from Telegram. Fine. Next, yeah, so it's building up a command parser, a command handler. Yeah, I mean, these are terms that you often use when building a bot like this, but notice it's sending a little alarm bells for me. I'm seeing a lot of programmery jargon, which I don't necessarily love, but command is fine. But yeah, like handler, interface, I'm like, we're just building a simple bot chat here. We don't need to get too crazy. Anyways, let's keep going. This is why we do this. The handler will have a handle method. Next, it's going to create an API client, and it will use the Laravel HTTP client to communicate. Fine. It's going to have messages like send message and send photo. Yeah, so what you can see here is it's basically building the entire functionality and interaction and client from scratch. Maybe it should have considered that there are packages already available that will do this better and more bug-free than we might do. All right, next it has a job to process Telegram message. It has form request to validate the incoming request. Service provider to register maybe our middleware in the client. We got a bunch of artisan commands, set webhook command, get webhook, delete. I hope alarm bells are going up for you as we do this. And this is, again, the distinction between what we might call developer-driven AI versus vibe coding. We have some exception handling. We have some tests. That's good. It's just, okay, here's the deal. We're at the end. I've already lost interest because I think we can hopefully all agree it's too much. We're building a simple little feature here, and this is like a whole thing. This is a whole thing, and I don't want it. So this is why we need to very much be involved in the entire process. So here's what I'm going to do. We're going to go right back to the AI and work on a new plan. So I've reviewed your plan, and I've come to the conclusion that it is drastically too complex. There's way too much going on here. You didn't review or you didn't consider the possibility that there are dedicated composer packages that will wrap all of this functionality up so that we don't have to write it out by hand. For example, I'd like you to take a look at the Nutgram composer package, which I believe offers a very nice and clean API to interact with Telegram. And I believe they offer a feature where we can register dedicated commands so that from the Telegram chat, we could just say /refund email, and then we can register a command to respond to that. So again, I want you to note that your current plan is too complex and too verbose. Your job is to simplify this, make it more clear, and pull in a dedicated Nutgram package through Composer to simplify this drastically. Please work on a new plan and update telegram.md. All right, and it's going to give it another try. All right, so now, yeah, while this is doing its thing, yeah, I just want you to consider that if we were vibe coding this, we would have just approved. And look, it would still work. And maybe the future is just the quality of the code doesn't matter really at all. But right now, to me, it does matter. And if we took a vibe coding approach for this feature, it would have been too complex and too verbose, way more than is necessary. And what about the next feature and the next feature? Very, very quickly, you can end up in a situation where every single feature is like 5 times more verbose than it needs to be. This is why, as developers, our job at this point is to very much be involved in the process. All right, so now we have an updated Telegram file. Let's take a look, and we're going to go through this very quickly. So now it's using Nutgram, spelled awkwardly. It wants us to pull in. All right, so it figured out we're using Laravel, and there is a Nutgram /Laravel package. It knows that we can create Telegram commands. Next, you can see it's recommending in a service provider or a routes file to register the command, and it's doing it all inline. We definitely don't want to do this within a service provider. We can create a dedicated routes/Telegram file. So once again, we'll need to update that. Let's keep going. All right, so it is detecting that there are dedicated Nutgram specific commands for registering webhooks with the Telegram API. Much better than what we had before. For complex commands, create dedicated handler classes. So yeah, we register the command. And yeah, real quick, if you've never done this before, in Telegram, you can do things like this, where you say /refund, that's the name of our command. You would send through an email, and this would get parsed by Nutgram. It would detect that we're running a refund command, and it would trigger the handler and pass through the associated email. But yeah, even in this case, like this is too much as well. It's just parsing the message text to figure out the email. We can use wildcards for that. And then for some reason, it's not picking up on that. All right, next, we register it, how to handle it, testing. Yep, okay, so this is using the API. All right, there's a few issues here, but this is 10 times better than the first plan it came up with. Okay, so we'll make a slight tweak here, and then we're going to get started. But real quick, it's important for me to reiterate, look, if we had run that initial chat multiple times, sometimes it might have pulled in Nutgram immediately, right? Sometimes it might have written the claim out from scratch manually with no dependencies. Sometimes it might have found a different package or SDK or something like that to pull in. So that's why you want to be a little bit careful. And sometimes it can be useful to try 2 or 3 different approaches and then work with AI to choose the best implementation. And we can talk about that in the future. Okay, anyways, back to the chat. I think this is significantly better. Good job. One thing I did notice is that when it comes to the command parameters, you're still parsing them and using explode. Have a look at the Nutgram documentation, and you will find that we can accept wildcards to our Nutgram commands in the same way that we can accept wildcards for Laravel routes. So I'm going to link you to that. I want you to review it, and then I want you to update the plan, and then you can get started. Okay, so very quickly, I'm visiting nutgram.dev. Let's go into the documentation down to handlers, perhaps. And we're going to look for parameters. Yeah, here we go. Here's an example. So we can register a listen for text or even a command. And notice that it can capture wildcards. And those wildcards are then sent to the handler or the callback. So I'm just going to copy this and include it with our chat. Review this documentation. Okay, so now it has updated this file, And yeah, let's see how it's going to prepare this. Yeah, this is what we want. It accepts the email address as the wildcard that is received within the handler. It does some validation. That's fine. Next, it has a section on order. That's fine. It doesn't really know what we're working on. We can tweak that ourselves. But this looks fairly good. So now what I think I'm going to do is create a brand new chat just so we can truncate things. And I can say read telegram.md plan and implement. It has everything it needs at that point. And by the way, just to show you that we can mix and match agents, yeah, there's nothing keeping you from implementing this feature in both Junie and Claude, and then you can review the results. All right, it looks like that's done now. We can see all the to-dos have been completed. Okay, so if we take a look at our project, we have a new Telegram folder. We have a help command, a refund command, and a start command. That's fine. You'll see if I scroll down, we have a test for Telegram command tests. If I give this a run, they all return green. We should also have a routes/telegram file, and this is where we register our commands. Notice bot register command, start command, help command, refund command, and then we have a fallback if we don't understand what you want. Perfect. Next, let's go into our environment file, and there should be, yeah, we have a Telegram bot token that it is currently waiting on. Good. What else? Let's go into our route/API. Ooh, did it not create one? No. So yeah, this is just such a great example. It did most of what it said it would do, but it didn't complete the job. So it entirely forgot the portion of registering a endpoint to receive the webhook. So in these cases, what we would do, and this is why we call this developer-driven API, is we could create a new file manually, and we're just going to pair with it. We'll say routes. We're going to listen for a post request to Telegram/webhook. And let's see if we have any controllers within here. HTTP controllers. Nope. So let's create one now. Let's create a Laravel controller. We'll call it Telegram webhook controller. All right, so now let's accept the Nutgram bot. And yeah, here we could just say something like bot run. And why don't we make this an invocable controller? Yeah, and that's basically it. So now if we switch back to routes/API, yeah, we could defer to that. And of course, yeah, if you want, you can add whatever middleware is necessary. So for example, if you want to throttle it as a protection, if you want to limit it to a particular user or Telegram user only, all of these things can be done. Okay, so now we have a route. Let's register that. And we can do that right here. Our API specific routes will live here. Again, these will not receive CSRF protection or things like that. Okay, so now I don't want to leave you hanging. I at least want you to see something here. So let's quickly register the bot on the Telegram end. The first step is to visit Telegram and search for bot father and start a chat. Okay, and one of the commands we can do is register a new bot. So notice how we use a command, / and then the name of the command. For our project, we'll have / and refund or / and coupon, stuff like that. Okay, let's make a new bot. We'll call it demo bot. Next, we need a username. It just needs to end with bot. Why don't we say LC for Laracasts _demo_bot. All right, and now it's going to give us a unique Telegram token. So we can copy this, switch back to our project, go into .env, and I will paste it here. So yeah, generally what you might want to do is set up one bot specifically for your local testing and then a different bot for your production. And that's one way that you can handle things like this. Okay, so now if we open up our terminal, let's run PHP Artisan. And you will see that there are a bunch of Nutgram specific commands we can run. So the ones I want you to focus on right now are Nutgram listen. This starts the polling for local development. And then also Nutgram hook set, which will set the bot webhook. And it's basically our way of saying, all right, Telegram, here's the URL that I want you to ping whenever a new message comes in. And again, to reiterate, that happens for production. Finally, notice Nutgram register commands. This is what tells Telegram about all of the commands that we have registered within our routes/Telegram file. So in this case, we would have 3. Okay, let's do it. PHP artisan nutgram register commands. Good. Next, let's do PHP artisan nutgram listen. All right, it's running. So now let's try a chat. I can click here to chat with our bot. And welcome to the order manager. Yeah, it's just assuming we have orders here, and we could have been more specific. So I might start by saying gibberish, and this should hit the fallback, unknown command. And that's happening because if I switch back right here, we have our fallback command. All right, so let's see what happens if we run help. I can say /help. And notice, by the way, this will list all of the commands, and these are available because we ran that register commands artisan command. And yeah, we can see 3 different commands we can run. And yeah, just to reiterate, they are defined here. All right, so here is our start command. We register it here, we add a description, and then we add a handler. Okay, so I want to show you some other things in the next episode, but here's what I want to leave you with. I want you to notice how if we had just vibe coded this project, it would have used the first implementation, which is like building everything from scratch and creating all of these command classes and handler classes and client classes. And it's just not necessary. So we had to work with it to guide it in the direction that we care about. And that's our job as developers, to review this plan and constantly tweak it and constantly let AI know when it's going too far out on a limb and when to rein it in. All right, so there's other stuff I want to show you that is somewhat related to this. So let's keep watching in the next episode. All right, here's one thing you will often run into. Sometimes an agent will be interacting with maybe a package you have installed, and it just doesn't know that much about it. Sometimes it'll just guess, or sometimes it'll scan the web and try to find some article that could potentially be wildly outdated. We've all run into this many times. So one way to get around to this is to leverage a tool like Context 7. Have a look. Yeah, so Context 7 provides up-to-date documentation for LLMs. So yeah, you can see, of course, it has support for all of the most popular tools, but even smaller packages. Maybe you're using like a SpotC library, and maybe you want to give it up-to-date information on how to generate images. Then you could pull this in, which is really cool. So I'll show you an example. I use a package for interacting with a Telegram bot. It's a composer package, and it's called Nutgram. So the first time I interacted with my agent, it just didn't know that much about it, and it made so many mistakes. But I could enhance its skills by basically saying, hey, here's the documentation, go learn it, and only at that point should you proceed. So let's see how we can make use of this. Let's open up Nutgram, or actually let's go into the documentation. And if we scroll down, we can see a context summary of how to use it. This is all incredibly helpful. Okay, so we can sign up for a free plan. Once you do, you can go to the dashboard. You'll see I already have an API key here, but let's just generate one on the fly. All right, and I'm going to copy that and then delete it at the end of the video. All right, next we need to connect it to PhpStorm and Junie if we're using that, or Claude Code. Just find the one you prefer. So in our case, let's see if we have something for Jetbrains. Let's see. Here we go. I'm going to look for Jetbrains. There we go. So all you have to do really is set up the MCP server. So here it is. I'm just going to grab this, and then we can use this with Junie, or really it'll work anywhere. Okay. All right, so from PhpStorm, I will open up my settings, and we're going to look for Junie. So remember, this is Junie-specific MCP settings. If you're using Claude, then you would need to add it the way they suggest on the website. All right, so we're going to add a new MCP server, and we're just going to paste it in right here. All right, so notice that we do need to provide an API key, so I will update this with the one we just copied and generated, like so. All right, there it is. So that should do it. And by the way, whenever you set up an MCP server, always make sure that you have it activated there. Okay, and that's it. Okay, so now all we have to do is ask Junie, in this case, to use it, like this. I'd like you to review my Telegram bot code that leverages the Nutgram library. Use Context 7 to confirm that I'm following best practices. And let's say C app services Telegram folder. All right, that's it. So the key here is that we said use Context 7. That's like the trigger. All right, let's go. Okay, so it's read some files, and here is the key prompt. Can it use the context7 MCP server? Yes. So it's going to figure out what the library ID is, and then it's going to query the up-to-date documentation, as you see here. All right, that's done. So let's take a look together. All right, so it changed a handful of files. I've reviewed the Telegram bot implementation, applied several improvements following Nutgram and Laravel best practices. Great. So yeah, I was using a standard Laravel middleware, but actually Nutgram has its own concept of middleware built in. So it looks like it implemented that. And it applied that global registration within our Telegram routes file. So real quick, I'll show you. Let's go in there. And yeah, now it registered an authorized admin middleware as part of Nutgram, and it figured that out because of the documentation. Okay, but anyways, what else? It updated our tests, some of which were failing. It ran Pint. It did an architectural review. It's reviewing my Telegram surface class. It's a useful abstraction for sending outgoing notifications. Correctly wraps the Nutgram instance. All right, no major refactoring was in. Okay, whew. Good. But yeah, you get the idea. So I know it seems like a small thing that may not be necessary. And trust me, especially for some packages, without it, AI is sort of flying blind, or it's going to search the web and try to find something to help it. And so often that information is wildly out of date or doesn't match the current version you have installed. So definitely consider something like context7. Now, because Jetbrains AI supports Claude as one of its agents, well, that means we have access to Claude features. For example, let's take a look at the terminal and boot up Claude code. And if I hit /, we can see all of the various built-in Claude commands that we can run. Now, you maybe didn't know this, but you can also write your own custom commands. And don't worry, this isn't a scary thing at all. Really, a command in Claude is just an alias for a prompt that you frequently write. It's just not much more complicated than that. I'll show you a couple examples. Back to my editor. If you've ever run Claude code in your project, you will have a .claude directory as you see here. Otherwise, just create it on your own. Within here, we're going to add a new directory called commands. And within here, let's create a markdown file that represents, again, some kind of prompt that we frequently write. Why don't we call this one, let's do something simple to start. How about learn? So just to get us started and to demonstrate how incredibly simple this is, I'm just going to say something dumb like, all you need to do is say hello to me. Do nothing else. Yeah, that's it, just to get us going and to show you, you can add front matter if you want, YAML front matter, but you don't have to. This will be fine. Okay, so the simple fact that we now have a commands directory with a single command, that's all we need. It will now show up in Claude code like this. Let's boot up Claude one more time. And if I hit /, sure enough, the top option is learn. All you need to do is say hello to me. All right, so notice that is taking the place of the description, but of course, we could add some YAML front matter to be explicit about that. Anyways, if I give this a run, it's going to read that file and do what it says, like a prompt. That's it, and it says hello, so it really is incredibly simple. All right, let's add, if you want, YAML front matter. If you're not familiar with this format, it is 3 dashes at the top of a file. Often it's used for static blogs and things like that to declare meta information. So in this case, we can declare the description. A simple demo greeting. All right, back to Claude. Boot up Claude one more time. Let's review our commands. And sure enough, now we are setting the description. So you get how that works. Okay, so now why don't we say I'm going to type learn, and I want Claude to teach me about that file and how it works. So maybe something like this. And I'm just going to paste this in to save ourselves some keystrokes. All right, so we're going to explain a file or symbol in plain English. Your senior developer, explain the purpose of whatever I pass in. And notice I can use just simple common references here, like $1 to reference the first argument you pass in, $2 to reference the second argument, and it's probably familiar to you. Anyways, if the argument is a file path, summarize what it does. If it looks like it's a function or a symbol, describe its purpose, and then give me 3 quick things to check next. And that's it. So again, you know what? This actually might be more useful than you'd think. Okay, so let's give it a shot. Why don't we go into app, Telegram, and learn about help command. Let's just figure out what it is. Okay, so back to the terminal. Open Claude. I want to learn about help command. There it is. We'll give it a run. So notice this is effectively an argument, and that will be sent through as $1. It's going to read that and explain what the file does. All right, and we're done. So help command is a Telegram bot command handler that responds when the user types hello, blah, blah, blah. You get the idea. And then at the bottom, this is kind of cool. 3 things to check next. Well, here's 2 other commands, and then also an app service provider to see how Nutgram discovers and registers the command handlers. Okay, pretty cool, right? Maybe we could do one more. Let's learn about, how about bootstrap/app.php. All right, that's done. So we're going to go super quick. Bootstrap file, central configuration hub for Laravel. This is how we use it. Here's the entry points and maybe some other files you should check out next. It could be helpful. Okay, let's do one a bit more practical now, though. So if I open up composer.json, yeah, you'll see within the script section, I have added a composer script called format that simply defers to rector and then PhpStorm and pint. It's a good habit to get into. Just run these whenever you're working on a commit and you're ready to push it up. Okay, so you'll remember in the, the developer-driven AI episode, we had AI work on some Telegram commands, but notice it's not honoring our formatting. So of course we could update our guidelines, but every once in a while it will ignore those as well. So it would be nice if we could ask AI to always run this. So here's one thing we could do. We could register it as a command right here, create a new file. We'll call it format. All right, so I'm going to paste this in. You don't want to watch me write this out by hand. It's a little painful. But we now have a format command that will format, test, and prepare for a git push. It'll do that by running that composer run format script. If PhpStorm triggers some kind of warning, it needs to fix the issue and then rerun until everything passes successfully. And then I want it to run test. Now, if the tests fail, it needs to fix the tests and then rerun composer run format just in case any discrepancies were introduced. Yeah, so again, this is the sort of thing that we could paste into a prompt ourselves. And maybe you've done this many times where you say, hey, do this, and then this, and then this, right? Well, with a command, we're just wrapping it in an alias of sorts that we can trigger, but also the AI or Claude can trigger itself. Let's give it a shot. So if I open up help command, I just want you to notice that the formatting is not correct. So we boot up Claude, run our commands, and here is format. All right, and that's done. So take a look real quick. It ran our format script. It ran rector and all of that stuff. It ran pint. Then it ran our test suite, which returned green. Here are the results. It fixed some files. Pint fixed some files. There were no PhpStorm issues. This is great, right? And here's the cool thing. Yes, we can trigger it like a traditional command. So I can say format or I can say learn. But also, I can instruct it to run this command as part of a different task. So I could say work on blah and blah. And when you're done, run format to finalize all of your changes, right? And it will be smart enough to know, okay, I need to work on whatever blah, blah is. And then at the very end, I'm going to run this format command. All we have to do is tell it to do that, and it will figure it out. So this is incredibly helpful for a couple of reasons. One, we are formalizing common prompts, so we're saving ourselves some keystrokes. And second, we can commit this to version control so that it can be shared against or across all members of our team. Tell me what you think. All right, next let's have a look at the prompt library in PhpStorm. It's pretty helpful. So for an example, I have this view component called button dropdown. And you can see it's a little bit old school. It was built using Vue 2 and the Options API. But now we want to upgrade it to Vue 3 and the Composition API. So before AI, we would do it by hand, and it was a little bit cumbersome. But now, of course, we can do it with a single click. And we have two choices. One, of course, we could open up an agent to take care of this for us. But if you're working file by file, it would be cool if I could just select this and then instantly upgrade it. Let's do that now. Here's how. If I select this file and I scroll up within the refactor section, you'll see there is a Add Your Prompts menu item. And this will take us to the prompt library. All right, so now we can see prompts for various things like how to write documentation or what to do when generating unit tests, if anything. And then we also have chat actions like find problems in the selected code, use the selected code for a new chat, suggest a refactoring. Why don't we create our own? Let's say Vue 2 to Vue 3, and I'll just paste this in. Convert this selection from Vue 2 Options API to Vue 3 Composition API using script setup and TypeScript. And then notice I can use this magic variable for the selection. But of course, you can change it to the entire file, certain lines, whatever you want. In our case, just the selection. Okay, so now that's all I have to do. I can create a new action within my prompt library. And now, whenever I select a section of code, or in this case, the entire file, now within the AI tab, notice we have an option right here, Vue 2 to Vue 3. We give that a run, and notice now it opens up the assistant, it uses our prompt, it references the selection, and it performs the update and outlines the changes. And yeah, in this case, if we want, we can apply it directly. All right, so now we have a diff to review the changes. I can hit return to accept all, and let's take a look at what it did. Okay, so now, once again, we're using script setup. We're using TypeScript. We define the options. This is all correct. We specify our various types. We define the emits, and that should make ESLint happy. This is great. And yeah, all it took was a single keystroke. So now if you're thinking, well, this is sort of like Claude commands. Yeah, it basically is. It's just sort of the PhpStorm closest equivalent. And this can still be incredibly helpful because it can apply to single lines, entire files, or full selections. And it only takes 20 seconds or so to configure. I think it's pretty cool. So if a Claude command is sort of like an alias or even a trigger for a prompt that we often write, then a Claude skill is more like a field guide. It's our way of saying to the AI, this is how we do things in these parts. You better follow these guidelines. All right, let me show you an example. So check this out. We're once again in the demo app for the Telegram bot that we built a few episodes ago. And have a look, we have an issue here. Within help command, we accidentally introduced a die test, and worse, we pushed it up to GitHub and we've distributed it and tagged it for our users. We got to fix this issue right away. But this time, rather than doing it by hand, let's have AI take care of the entire process. All right, here's how. Let's switch to full screen, and I will bring up the terminal. And yeah, if we want to interact with GitHub, of course, the first thing we should do is install the GitHub CLI. So we can do that using Homebrew. I could say brew install GH, but I already have that installed on my machine. So if I were to expand this and run GH, you'll see all of the various commands we can run. And yeah, if you're doing that for the first time, there will be a quick setup so that you can authenticate. It takes 20 seconds. Okay, so I already have a GitHub repository for this project. So why don't we create an issue? We're going to simulate a user complaining about our project. Let's clear this and say GitHub issue create. Let's say help Telegram command not working. And let's launch Vim, trying to use the bot and the help command, but nothing happens. All right, good enough. That simulates an issue. So we will submit it, and now we have an issue right here. We can review all of our issues using the CLI by saying GH issue list. All right, and sure enough, we have exactly one issue at the moment. Next, we could say GitHub issue show, And I can provide, as you'll see right here, I'm sorry, GitHub issue view, and we need to provide the issue number that we are reviewing, right? So in this case, I believe it was issue number 3. All right, so GitHub issue view 3. And yeah, now from the CLI, we can review all of the details for this issue that needs to be fixed. Okay, so now let's create a Claude skill to take care of the entire process. We can create a Claude skill once again within the Claude directory. And this time I'm going to add a folder called skills. And the only difference from commands is each skill could potentially consist of multiple files. So with that in mind, let's add a directory, and we should add this directory. And why don't we call it fix issue? And then within here, we can add our markdown file. Now, let's name it skill.md. That's the common convention that we should follow. All right, so let's close this and switch to 2UP. And yeah, as before, we're not going to write this all out by hand, but we would add our YAML front matter. And it's very important that our description is clear and gives clues to the AI about when it should reach for this skill. Remember, it's a field guide, it's a guideline, and we want to make sure that AI thinks to review this skill and follow this skill whenever we reference certain keywords and suggestions. Okay, so we might say, review a GitHub issue, solve the issue, and submit a PR fix. Yeah, something like that. Okay, so now if we were to open up the terminal, or don't forget, we can reference any of our commands or skills directly from the Jetbrains AI as well, as long as we're using the Cloud agent. Okay, anyhow, let's boot up Claude, and let's list all of our skills and expand. And sure enough, we can see exactly one project skill at the moment for fix issue. And at the moment, it doesn't do anything. Okay. So yeah, let's just think about it. If we were to do this by hand, the old school way, what would you do? Well, you would review the issue, of course. You'd look at it. You'd analyze it. Then you would check out a branch, perhaps. And maybe one team has a convention for the name of the branch you create, and then other teams don't care at all, right? This is why we create the field guide, so that we can mold the AI according to how your team behaves. So maybe your team's convention is you create a new branch, and you call it fix/issue dash, and then the number of the issue up on GitHub. Okay? Now that you have a branch, you solve the issue. Maybe you have a mandate that tests or regression tests must be written as part of the fix. And then you need to, of course, commit your changes. Maybe there is a specific convention for how you commit those changes, right? Maybe the commit message should be fix/issue number, whatever the issue is again. Maybe you have to provide a description with the commit message. Maybe you don't. Anyways, and then finally, you need to submit a PR, and the PR needs to list that it closes the issue. It needs to summarize the fixes and stuff like that. So just take whatever those steps are for your team and document them. And if you want, you can be really sloppy, just do a quick bulleted list. And then, of course, you can reach for AI to expand upon this and suggest things that you might have forgotten. So with that in mind, here's what we might reach for. I'm going to paste this in here. All right. Yeah, it's just too much to write by hand. All right, so here's how we're fixing GitHub issues. Follow this approach. This is our field guide. This is our guideline. First, we need context. So fetch the issue details, and as we've learned, we can say GitHub issue view and then the number. All right, have a look. Take a look at it like we just discussed. Next, I want you to create a branch. So we're going to create a branch using this convention. Git, check out a branch called fix issue 4 or 5. I think it's 3 in this case. Next, I want you to follow all of our existing guidelines and code standards. I want you to write tests. And this is a key line that I find in my own projects. You cannot consider this work as complete until my test suite passes. Now, of course, we want to make sure the test suite passed before this issue. Otherwise, it's going to be fixing a lot of unrelated things. But yeah, this is a key component. Often, maybe you've seen this in the past, AI will provide a fix, and then you run the test suite, and you think, well, did you fix it? Because none of the tests are passing. This is all broken. You didn't do what you said you did. So yeah, this is key. Keep running this until the issue is solved. Next, we're going to run the format command. And this is the Claude command that we learned about in maybe the previous episode. That will simply, it's just an AI shortcut or trigger that runs composer run format and then PhpStorm and test again. So really, if we want, in this case, we could probably remove that because format includes the test suite, even though we probably should change that name to something like finalize, honestly. That better represents what it does. Nonetheless, I'm going to keep both. Okay, so now we're going to commit. This is our convention. This is our team's convention for commit messages that resolve issues. Next, we're going to create the PR, and here is a suggestion for how we would create it. So this looks complicated, but really we just have a summary, like a template for what the description should look like. And you can submit a PR using the GitHub utility by saying PR create, give it a title, give it a body, and then you can push that up. All right, so we give it some details, and then the final output is, how do you respond to me when I'm chatting with you? Well, give me a summary, tell me what was changed, and then give me a link to the PR. This is it. And you can tweak this if you want. We can go back to AI and ask it to optimize or suggest anything. This will do the trick nicely. All right, so now let's try this out. And I'm just going to warn you, if you've never seen this before, it's pretty wild. And in fact, at the end of the video, I'll tease you on how we might take this even further. All right, so actually, I know you're excited to try this out, but one last thing, I want to stress this before we try it out. If we open up our skill, this is a field guide. It's a handbook for AI. But what you may find is that sometimes it just doesn't read the field guide. So we want to nudge it in the right direction as much as we can. So here's how. At least initially, Claude does not load all of these skills into the context. Instead, it'll just have like the name and the description only. So it doesn't have any of this unless it basically opens up that field guide. So that means it's really important that the description describes what the skill does as well as when it should be reached for. So in our case, we have what it does down. It reviews GitHub issue, it solves it, and submits a PR fix. But next, when should it reach for it? Well, maybe even if it's a little redundant, let's say, reach for this skill whenever I ask you to fix a GitHub issue. And that should be good. Next, if you want, you can even be a little more explicit. This is fix a GitHub issue or Git issue. Okay, but now let's say you run it, and I would imagine it's going to read the skill, but let's say it just doesn't for some reason. Okay, in that case, let's nudge it a little more in the right direction, and here's how. If we scroll down, you'll see I have a claude.md file, but actually this is being populated by Laravel Boost, which we have installed, and you can find it here. So Laravel Boost dynamically generates this guideline claude.md file. So I could append here if I want, but the next time I run Boost install, it will clear it out. So instead, what we can do is we can create our own guidelines that will be appended by Boost. Here's how. I'm going to create a new directory called .ai. Then within here, let's add another directory for guidelines, and we can add as many markdown files as we want. So why don't we call this skills.md? And yeah, we're just going to follow the same convention that Claude's using. So we have a heading and then a description. Okay? Skills. And I'll paste this in. And yeah, let's use tab completion here. Okay, when asked to fix a GitHub issue, immediately use the fix issue Claude skill instead of manually running commands. Okay, so once again, we're being a little redundant here, but we're nudging Claude in the proper direction. And hopefully this will do the trick for us. Okay, so bring up the terminal. Because we have added a new Boost guideline, I can say PHP artisan Boost install. Remember though, if you are not using Laravel Boost, then you can simply append to your own claude.md file directly. So now let's give it a shot finally. Let's boot up Claude. Have a look at GitHub issue number 3, make a fix, and submit a PR. Bingo, GitHub PR create. Proceed. All right, let's have a look at the summary. It solved the issue. The problem was that, of course, there was a die statement in there. It fixed it by removing it entirely. And now here is a link to the PR. Here's the PR. All right, let's take a look at the files changed. Of course, we just removed that single line. So now I can, of course, merge the pull request. And now AI has solved our problem. Come on. It's ridiculous. All right, so now that we know how to build our own code analyzer skill, as it turns out, Claude Code actually open sourced their version, and then Taylor Otwell converted it to Laravel. So have a look. Here is the open source version from Claude. And if I go back, here is where Taylor converted it. So let's have a look. We can add it through the Claude marketplace, and then we can install Laravel Simplifier. But first, before we do this, I just want you to take a look at what the markdown file is. So here's the repository, here's the Laravel Simplifier. And yeah, all I want you to notice is that within agents, we have a single markdown file. That's all these things are. It's kind of wild, but it's just a markdown file. So we have our YAML front matter that we've learned about. And yeah, it's just a prompt at the end of the day. So it's saying you're a Laravel expert, look over these things, simplify it, focus on elegance and clarity, exactly what you'd expect. All right, so if you want to use this, here's how we can install it. So from the terminal, let's boot up Claude, and we're going to go to the plugin command. And if I expand this, we're going to switch over to the marketplaces tab, and I can literally hit tab to switch over to that. We're going to add a new marketplace, and I can reference the repository name. So in this case, on GitHub, it's Laravel, of course, and the name of the repo is Claude Code. So that will add the marketplace, and here are the plugins. So let's take a look at that. Simplifies and refines Laravel code for clarity, consistency, and maintainability. Let's install, and we're all set to go. That's it. Okay, so now here's what I want to show you. If I open a new tab and run git status, I'm currently working on this video pipeline feature. It is quite a massive dashboard that I'm very much letting AI drive. But I've noticed as it's doing its thing, over time, the code quality just kind of deteriorates. You end up with some weird stuff. So why don't we see if we can run this code analyzer to improve the clarity? So here's how. I'm going to run the agents command to see all of the agents that we have installed. And we should have one for, I don't see it. You know what? Maybe I need to refresh it. Let's boot it up again since I just installed it. Let's run agents, and yeah, there it is. So here is the plugin agent, and that is our code analyzer. Okay, so I can just copy this, and I can ask AI to use it. Use the Laravel Simplifier agent to review all changed files in Git, and then clean things up while confirming that the tests still continue to pass. All right, let's give that a run. It'll take maybe a moment or so. All right, and very quickly, if I switch to full screen, sure enough, it is reaching for that agent. All right, so we're going to have this get started. All right, that's done. I'm not going to lie, I'm a little bit excited here. And a quick note, that took a good 5 minutes or so because it's quite extensive, this section that I'm working on. So let's see. Review and cleaned up all the changed files. So it added a reusable trait that eliminates repetitive error handling across all 5 pipeline jobs. Cool. It extracted common logic. It improved clarity. It added proper return types. Yeah, so you get the idea. It's not going to be a magic bullet, though. That's the important thing to understand. And all of the tests continue to pass. Although, always confirm that, by the way. Sometimes it'll say the test passed, and then you run the tests, and they do not pass. Nonetheless, though, this is pretty cool. And maybe we can take a look at one of the files. Maybe let's have a look at pipeline controller together. Don't worry about the code specifically, other than whether it's clear or not. And a quick note, pipeline, this corresponds to our video pipeline at Laracasts. It's internal stuff. It's how we prepare a course. If you think about it, for every course we have on the site, we have to generate a bunch of stuff, thumbnails. We have to upload each episode to S3. We have to enhance it. We have to extract the audio. We have to generate transcripts. From the transcripts, we then further generate summaries and markdown articles and things like that. Anyway, so here's where we can view the dashboard, which is what this focused on. So yeah, you can see it grabs all of our pending series. It determines if we have any filters. It could also just use when there. Sets up the various stats, and then it loads the corresponding page. I mean, this is fine. I might do a couple things differently, but that's okay. I will tell you this is quite a bit more clean than what we started with. But yeah, really, that's mostly it. So now you know, if you want, you can pull in a Laravel-specific code analyzer through the marketplace. All right, next up is Claude Subagents. But before we even get started, I think this can get a little confusing. You learn about commands. Fine, I got it. And then you learn about skills, and you think, okay, I kind of get it. But then subagents come in, and you're like, well, you know what? There's a little bit of overlap between these three. When would I use a command versus a skill versus a subagent? It can definitely get a little bit confusing. All right, so let's go over it really, really quick. Your recap. A command is like a trigger. And the closest correlation I can think of is like an artisan command if you're building a Laravel app. It's something you trigger. Do this thing. Cool. We got that down. Next, a skill is a guidebook. It's a field guide. This is the way we go about doing things. When I ask you to do this, well, these are the steps that I want you to follow. So notice the difference there. I'm not telling it to do that thing. I'm saying when and if you need to do that thing, here's your field guide that you can look through to determine how we want it done. Got it. But now subagents are a little bit tricky because they're sort of like commands, except they happen in isolation without clogging up the current context window. And there's definitely benefits to that. All right, so if it helps, this is how my dumb brain thinks of it. They're analogous to throwing something onto a queue. Think about it. If I throw a job onto a Laravel queue, what happens? Well, it's a way to say, let's do this in the background so that I can return a response as quickly as possible. Well, subagents are a little bit like that. But it does have the benefit that when we spin up a subagent, it does all this work, it figures out what it needs to do, but it doesn't clog up the current context, the current chat. Think about it. What if AI decides it needs to figure out the answer to something, but that's going to take 2 or 3 minutes, and it's going to ask itself all of these questions. Now I need to run this query. Now I need to go here. Now I need to do this. And you just bloat up the current context to figure out the answer to this one thing, right? Well, you could take that synchronous, manual, bloaty approach, or instead you could spin up a subagent where you just push it off into isolation. It has its own context. It figures out the answer, and then it returns a response to the main context, and then we can continue on. That's how I think of this, and maybe that helps. I'm going to show you some examples now. Let's bring up the terminal and boot up Claude full screen. I'm going to run the agents command to create a new agent. At the moment, we have none. All right. Let's create one for this project, and we're going to have Claude generate it. So we're basically going to provide a prompt, and then it will jumpstart this markdown file for us. All right, so I want to create a new agent for code reviewing. This is a common example, but actually I find it to be incredibly helpful for all of my projects. Act as a senior Laravel engineer and provide a comprehensive code review for any changed Git files or files in Git. All right, that should be enough to get us started. So yeah, it's just going to use that as a prompt to build up the markdown file. And as you'll find out, whether it's a command or a skill or an agent, it's still just a markdown file, which is wild. All right, next, what tools should it have access to? You might want to start with just all tools. What model do you want it to use? I kind of use Opus for everything at the time of this recording. That's the best one. Next, what color do we want? Why don't we use yellow to represent a code review? Like, warning, I'm going to go over this. Don't proceed. Don't push it yet. And here it is. So let's save it. And we now have an agent. Let's take a look. If I switch to full screen, and we bring up the sidebar, you'll now see a new Claude agents directory, and here is our code reviewer. All right, so notice once again, we have a description, and this is very important. Use this agent when you need a comprehensive code review of recently changed files in Git. This includes after completing a feature, fixing a bug. Yeah, it encompasses everything you might want to add there. And you can even do something like you must use this agent when you need a comprehensive code review. Sometimes little keywords like that actually activate it, which is really funny. All right, so let's have a look. You're a senior Laravel developer with 10 plus years of experience. You have deep expertise. Here is your process. So you're going to figure out. So again, notice it's kind of like an instruction. It's almost like a command. And we'll figure out how we might merge commands and agents in just a little bit. But yeah, figure out what changed. Look at the files and then apply a review criteria using what you see here. And yeah, your job would be to go through this and pluck whatever you want to keep and get rid of whatever you don't. So for example, some things I might do is like if you're a big advocate for type safety, then you'll want to make sure you have a note here. And remember, maybe it adds it here, maybe it doesn't. That's the way AI works. If it's not there and you're a big proponent of type safety, then include it there, right? Instructions for view. Again, notice this is dynamic based upon my project here. Testing. We might even add a section here like, let's say finalize. You must run the finalize Claude command to confirm formatting and test suite passes. Okay, that's part of the code review. Like, does this actually work? Does it meet our style guide? Do all the tests pass? Sometimes, by the way, it helps if I scroll up. We'll say guidelines and ensure that guidelines from Claude.md are properly followed. Yeah, so ideally it should have done this already, but as you've probably experienced, sometimes it just seems like it will skip over a section where it's like, I said in my guideline not to do this, but you still did it. So wherever you can, you want to further emphasize these things. So as part of our code review agent, we can say, yeah, just take a look at the guidelines and make sure that this adheres to it. So even if we're somewhat redundant, that's okay. And then at the very bottom, you might ask for some suggestions. Yeah, optional and enhancements and nice to haves. All right, so here's the checklist. This is very nicely formatted, if maybe a bit more verbose than it needs to be. Final steps, after reviewing all files, yeah, we're going to get rid of this entirely. And that's good enough to get us going. Okay, so now we have an agent. We have some guidelines or some hints as to when this agent should be deferred to. But of course, you can also just tell Claude to use this agent. So let's use an example here. Yeah, this is easy enough to understand. All right, so we have this index action, and you can see we fetch all of the chat messages for the current user, and we return them as a API resource collection. Okay, but imagine we're working on this, and maybe at one point we accidentally change the visibility, and then maybe we decide, you know what, let's extract this into a messages variable, like this. And that looks good. And maybe we do some other things. But here's the thing. One issue is that this is the wrong visibility, and we want our code reviewer to figure that out. And then next, maybe one of our guidelines is that we avoid using the helper functions. Instead, we prefer the dedicated facades. So I actually want to see auth user rather than the helper function. One's not necessarily better than the other. They're effectively identical, but pick one and stick with it, right? So nonetheless, our code reviewer should pick up on this. So here's what we can do. I'm going to go into my Laravel.md guidelines file. And let's add a note about how we want it to handle facades. Okay, so we could say always favor Laravel facades over the helper function equivalents. And I always want to give it an example. So I could say example, and let's see if it can do it for us. Route get, let's do something like this. Example, auth user over the helper function. Yeah, simple enough. So I am using Laravel Boost in this case, so I'm going to regenerate my guidelines file. PHP artisan boost install. All right, that's done. So now think about it. We have some guidelines here. We have a code reviewer. Part of that code review instructs it to ensure that our guidelines are being followed properly. So now why don't we test it out? So let's do the terminal instead. If I run git status, we can see that chat controller that we worked on. All right, let's boot up Claude. And this time I'm going to explicitly trigger it. But of course, one of the benefits is that these agents can be treated almost like event listeners. When you get to this point, then I want you to, in isolation, run this agent. Okay, run the code reviewer subagent to review any changed files in Git. All right, and that is reasonably fast. So let's take a look at the code review. Protected method breaks routing. Good job. It picked up on that. It's missing a return type. It noticed that our guidelines are not being followed. And it's suggesting that maybe we should extract a dedicated form request class. And maybe that's declared by Laravel Boost, but I don't think it's necessarily paramount. Let's say fix 1 and 2 from your list. All right, and that's fixed. Very cool. But here's one other thing we could do as well. So here we have just one agent, but of course you could create more if you want. But yeah, if you look at it, it's sort of like a command, right? And that's where there's a little bit of overlap. So here's one thing that might be cool. What if we made this available as a subagent, but also a command? Here's what we might do. I'm going to select all of this, remove it, and create a new command. Code review.md. Our description will be perform a code review on changed files. And I'm going to paste all of that in right here. Okay, so now if I did nothing else, I can trigger this as a command. Let me show you. Bring up the terminal, Claude, and if I run code review, there it is. Cool. So now what we could do is on our subagent, we can simply have it defer to the command. We keep this one, but now I can say run the code review Claude command to begin the review. Cool. So now we have a subagent that defers to an existing command. Perfect. So yeah, now if I were to bring back our chat controller, I will undo it, bring it back to everything that we had before. There we go. Now let's trigger it again. Claude code review. And now it's going to perform that task, but of course it's going to happen inside of the current context window. Okay, good to know. Okay, so now here's some potential use cases that you might like. Keep in mind that Claude will defer to subagents as it deems necessary, right? So you don't constantly have to tell it to do so. However, sometimes it can be useful when you're brainstorming. For example, imagine you want to consider a new feature and you want to see maybe 2 or 3 different implementations. Well, what you could do is tell your agent to boot up 3 subagents that take different approaches so that you can then review and choose which approach you like the most. Or you can even have Claude do that, compare the results of 3 approaches and then choose the cleanest one, right? All of those would happen effectively asynchronously or at the same time concurrently. And it's a cool way to go. You can even do this for design-related stuff as well. Okay, let's try it out. And let's see. Currently, when messaging our Telegram bot, a webhook is sent to the server that gets converted into a command, and then a response is returned, right? I would like to build a dashboard to monitor these interactions. I want you to spin up 2 subagents to plan out how this will be implemented, and then I'd like to review both to determine the best option. Also, I'd like you to recommend which one seems to be the cleanest approach to you. All right, so I have plan mode turned on, and in Claude Code, I can shift tab to choose plan mode, and let's give it a run. So it's going to first explore the code base, and then it's going to launch 2 plan agents with different approaches. Okay, so I fast forwarded, but take a look here. It's now running 2 plan agents concurrently. So we have one with a minimal dashboard approach, and then we have another plan that's a bit more feature rich. And notice though, you are going to be using more tokens, so be aware of that, but we can review the token usage for each as they run. All right, here we go. So we had 2 plan agents run concurrently. Let me summarize and provide recommendations. Yeah, this is very cool. Here's approach 1 using minimal played, or approach 2 with live wire. Recommendation, approach number 1. Here are the benefits, but it would enhance it slightly with response time tracking from approach 2. Yeah, very cool. So it's merging both of them slightly to make something even better than either approaches individually. So here's the updated plan, everything it would follow. It's so incredibly cool. And then, of course, we can review ourselves each plan and choose the one that best fits the way that we might go about it. Okay, so hopefully that clears things up. Now, here's the reality. I think commands you will use the most, right? Commands are just sort of like snippets. They're aliases for things you do all the time. A skill, once again, is a guidebook, and maybe you don't have many field guides in your application. That's okay. But if there is a dedicated way for how we do things here, whether it's creating an open graph image, maybe you have a system where this needs to be created, then you got to visit this URL and you got to boot up this server. If that's the case, document it. It's knowledge. Skills are knowledge. Commands are triggers. And then subagents are sort of like tasks, but they happen in isolation. And again, the biggest win, in my opinion, is it doesn't clog up the current context window. It doesn't muddy it. But also, as we've just seen, another win is that we can run different agents concurrently to speed things up. So let me know what you think and if you will be reaching for a subagent. All right, this next one's kind of cool. If you use Claude Code, you can hook it up to Google Chrome so that it will physically open a web browser and interact with it to confirm that the work it did ... actually works. So let me show you. So here you can see it's currently in beta at the time of this recording. And if we set it up, all you need to do is update Claude to the latest version. And then you can boot up Claude with this Chrome flag. Next, you can run the Chrome command to check the connection and make sure everything's working. And that's basically it. So now when you instruct it to open the browser, it's going to open the browser. Let's see. So here I'm in the Laracasts project. Let's boot up Claude with the Chrome flag. And actually, very, very quickly before we get started, if you use PhpStorm like I do, run the IDE command and make sure that you have PhpStorm selected. That will allow it effectively to communicate with PhpStorm. And there's also MCP tools that will allow it to better navigate your project. Okay, so anyways, here's what we're going to do. Why don't we say, we're working on the authentication or the registration process, and I'd like Claude to go through and just make sure that everything works as expected. Let's do that now. All right, so we visit Laracasts, we find the Get Started button, and then we want to test that a guest account can be registered successfully. All right, let's give it a run. All right, so it boots up Laracasts. It brings up the registration page. And if I switch back, by the way, you'll see, all right, I can see that. I see the link. Let me click on it. The registration form has appeared. Here's what I see. So you can just see this is just a prompt back and forth. All right, let's fill it out. What fields do we need? We need a username. All right, what do we need next? We need an email. So it's a little bit slower, but it's fully automated, which is incredibly cool. And welcome aboard. All right, and now that's done. So yeah, check it out. The test successfully verified the registration flow. Here's what it did, and it is working correctly. And yeah, that's mostly it. So now if you're wondering, well, when would I reach for this? Well, of course, you could do it like this, and that's really helpful, I think, when you're in the midst of working on something. But ideally, you have dedicated browser tests in the future that will automatically do this. But this can also be helpful when debugging or implementing features. For example, have you ever seen this, where you have AI working on a feature and it says everything works, and then you open the browser and you see a white screen of death? So maybe on the back end it works, but yeah, once you turn the ignition and you start the car and you open the web browser, it doesn't actually work. Well, you can wire it up to Chrome to say, okay, you can consider this feature complete when you open the browser and you can interact with it in the way that I have requested. So it's going to do that. It'll build the code, and then you'll see it'll say, all right, now I'm going to open the browser and visit the bookmarks page or whatever it happens to be, and it will confirm it works. And if it doesn't work, it'll stick to the drawing board. So this really is an incredible feature that you shouldn't ignore. All right, so now imagine this. Let's say somebody on your team submits a PR, and you're on GitHub, and you're reviewing it. And you think to yourself, you know what? I wish we had asked Claude to do such and such. Well, now, even within GitHub, you can simply mention Claude to have it do the work you need. It's actually very, very cool. Let me show you. Now, before we can illustrate this feature, of course, I need a PR to work with. So why don't we quickly whip one up? I'm in the Laravel Workshop project again, and we're going to work on bookmarks. So from the terminal, I'm going to check out a branch for this feature, bookmarking. And then I'm going to use Laravel IDEA to quickly whip up a Laravel model. And I'm going to name it a little differently than I normally would, and you'll see why shortly. We'll call it post bookmark. And I'm going to set up some relations. A bookmark belongs to a post, but it also belongs to a user. So we'll have a migration and a factory, and that should be good to go. All right, so now we have our migration. We have our model. This is good. And let's just imagine this encompasses the full feature, which it doesn't. OK, from the terminal, let's add everything, and we'll say implement bookmarking. All right, let's push this up to GitHub. So here's our feature. And then I have the GitHub CLI installed, so I can create a PR directly from the terminal. If you don't, just Google GitHub CLI, and you'll have it in 20 seconds. So I can say GitHub PR, create, title, add, once again, bookmarking, and the body is, this should be all you need. What a lie. All right, so we give it a run, and here we go. We have our pull request. Let's have a look on GitHub. All right, here we are, and sure enough, one pull request to add bookmarking, and here are the changed files. Okay, so let's imagine I am the project manager or the dev team lead, and as I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, all right, this looks fine, but you know what? Let's not call it post bookmark. I just want to call it bookmark. So I could wait for the person to make this fix, and that would be fine, of course. But in situations like this, we can just ask Claude to do it directly from the discussion here. Here's how we can allow for that. From the terminal, I'm going to boot up Claude directly. And I'm going to run a command called install GitHub app. All right, so let's expand this. And it's going to say, all right, are we going to install for the current repository? Yes. Here we need to grant permission. If I scroll down, only the selected repository. We'll look for workshop. There it is. And we will authorize. All right, with that done, let's proceed. Now, do we want to tag Claude and also have it perform automatic code reviews? For now, why don't we just have the ability to tag it? All right, let's create a token. Authorize. All right, so now the next step is they have created a PR for a repository that adds the GitHub action. So we can take a look at that right now. So here it is right here, add Claude code GitHub workflow. That looks good. We'll create that. We can take a look at what's going on here. Just sets up the workflow here. Don't worry about it. And now we can go ahead and merge this in. All right, and we're all set. So that should be everything we need. Let's come back to our PR. And now I'm just going to ask Claude to make the tweak for us. I will mention Claude and say, change post bookmark to simply bookmark. And then update related files as needed. All right, so this is pretty cool. So I'm going to leave this comment. It will pick up on that, and it will trigger a workflow. So if we come up here to actions, and here it is. So it's already running. We can see, yeah, it's literally installing Claude, and it's going to run Claude using the prompt that we provided within that comment there. So if we give this a fast forward and switch back to the PR, if I scroll down, oh, yep, it's already done. What's cool about this is it's dynamic, by the way. So you'll see the items check as they are completed. So here's the summary. It renamed post bookmark to bookmark. And of course, it updated the migrations and the factories as needed. So now let's take a look. And now we have a bookmark class and a bookmark factory. And of course, the migration should create a bookmarks table. This is what we want. And now I could go ahead and merge it in. So cool. Now, this next technique is very cool. If you're using Claude and you're planning out a new feature, you can actually have it interview you for the purposes of building up a plan. And I bet if you do, you'll get much better results. Let me show you. Let's bring up the terminal, boot up Claude, and let's say, have a look at my video pipeline. This handles the process of preparing and uploading all new course episodes. But now I want a dashboard so that I can visualize the progress. So I want you to take a look at that directory, review how it works, and then I want you to interview me, using the Ask User Question tool. This is a special tool that comes with Claude. Sometimes it will do this automatically, but here we're going to be explicit that we want it to ask us questions before it works on the plan. To make a plan, I'll hit Shift-Tab to confirm that we're in plan mode, and here we go. All right, so I'll explore your pipeline to understand how it works. And yeah, while it's exploring, I'll show you a couple things real quick. I have these worker bee classes. So you can see the API. It's video, work, and release. And we have all of these different implementations that are responsible for uploading to S3, optimizing the audio, transcoding it, moving it to Vimeo, creating transcripts, all of that stuff. There's actually a number of things that need to happen. If I take a look, here are some of them. So we edit. That's like an AI generation task. We have a reset. We have transcoding. We have uploading. And yeah, I just think of these as worker bees. Each of them has one little task that it's responsible for. So we're going to create a dashboard to visualize all of this. All right, here we go. So real quick, you can see it scanned everything. It figured out the general pipeline flow. And now it's going to start interviewing me before it works on the plan. All right, what's the primary view you want? A series-level overview showing all pending series and their overall progress, or a detailed episode-by-episode view? So do we want overview, detail, or actually, I want both. So yes. Should the dashboard update automatically or require a manual refresh? Let's do actually deferred props. Do you want to take action from the dashboard or just view status? I definitely need to be able to take action. For example, if I decide a video should be marked as free, I should be able to check a button there, and then it will update to the DB. Full control. Next, where should this dashboard live? Do we want a standalone page? Yes, we're going to do admin/pipeline. And yeah, you get the idea. So I can submit these answers, and now it can use that to construct the plan. And again, without taking that step, sometimes it's just going to fill in the gaps. It's going to guess on your behalf. And if you are not meticulous about reviewing these plans, then sometimes a lot of work will happen just for you to find out that you don't like what it did. Oh, a few more. How should the pipeline stages be visualized for each episode? Progress bar. What actions do we need? Do we want reset? Do we want retry? Edit metadata? All of the above. Should the dashboard show historical completed series or only active ones? Recent history. All right, here we go. And now we can see the full plan, and it's not worth going over in detail. But yeah, it is going to be significantly more in-depth and thoughtful as a result of doing that interview. And that's the key thing. When you're working on a new feature, especially a feature where it's not fully thought out yet, it would be very, very helpful to ask the agent to interview you for the purposes of fleshing out the plan, and then you can get started. I want to talk to you about the importance of testing. Let's start with an example. I'm going to use the Claude agent, and I'll paste in a prompt for brevity. Okay, so this relates to our support ticket dashboard. Effectively, when you view a support ticket, we show labels that have been assigned, but there's currently no way to remove a label, and we want the AI to fix this. And real quick, let me just show you an example. And this is very much a work in progress, mind you. But sure enough, we can see a list of labels at the top, but there's no way to remove that label from the ticket if I need to. So that's what we're going to work on now. All right, that's done, but take a look at this. So perfect, I've successfully implemented the label removal feature. It updated the pill component, which is the label. It created a controller, which responds to the request. It added the route. It updated the page. This is fine, but here's the problem. It didn't include any tests as part of this, and that's a really big problem. Here's why. If I were to take a look at the controller itself, all right, so support ticket label controller, and sure enough, we have a destroy action because we're kind of destroying the label. We're following a cruddy by design approach. Oh, and by the way, if you're working along and AI doesn't do that for you, update your guidelines. Tell it to, and it will adhere to that. Otherwise, it might have something like remove label, and it'll do stuff like that. It's fine if that's what you want, but I like to stick to the 7 resourceful actions. Okay, anyways, so here, on a support ticket, labels is like an array, and we use the as array object cast. Take a look. Support ticket, yeah, just very quickly, let me scroll down to casts. Yeah, so labels is just as array object, which gives us an easy way to interact with it and remove and unset items from it. Okay. Anyways, though, notice right here, it's using this funky thing where it calls get array copy, and then it uses a collection to reject the item being passed through. This is just not how I would do it. So here's the problem, though, is even if I were to ask AI to make the fix, it might try, but it has no verification to prove that it was successful. And this is where tests really come into play. We want to be able to say, look, here are some tests. They currently return green. I want you to change such and such, and you will know you are successful because after your change, the tests still continue to return green, right? Right now, we don't have that at all, so we can't successfully refactor. This is a human lesson we learn, and it also applies to AI that much more, actually. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to go into my guidelines file, and that will be within AI guidelines. And let's just go into Laravel. And I've actually trimmed this down for the demo, but here are some ideas for things you might add here. Let's do a new one. When creating a new endpoint and controller / action, you must create a relevant feature and smoke test to confirm it works. Okay, so now remember, whenever you update a guidelines file, and if you are using Laravel Boost, then you need to refresh your guidelines like this. PHP Artisan Boost install. So that will regenerate the guidelines file, whether it's agents.md or claude.md or Junie, and it will make sure that these take precedence at the top of the file. Cool. Next, let's come back to our agent. And I'm actually going to start a new chat, even though we're losing a little bit of context. That's OK. For support ticket label controller, we don't have any feature tests. Review your guidelines file and implement one to confirm that label removal works as expected. Yeah, in this new reality where AI is generating so much of the code, the debate about whether to write tests or not is gone. You have to do it. It's a requirement. All right, that's done. So let's take a look. All right, let's see. So we have some authentication or authorization stuff. Guests cannot remove labels. Fine. What else? Removing a label from a ticket that has no labels does nothing. Yeah. So if you make that request to remove a label and the ticket never had it in the first place, then we need to handle that. This is fine. Maybe a touch more verbose than I would reach for, but that's fine. It works. So I can run all of these tests. And now here's the cool thing. If I want to continue working by hand, old school style, that's fine because I have the tests backing me up. But further, if I want AI to make the change, it has the same benefit, right? So let's go into that controller now. Support ticket label controller. Yeah, so you'll remember this was the section that confused me, right? Get array object. This just seems more verbose than it needs to be. For example, let's see, could we do this? If empty labels, let's give that a run. All right, still passes. Next, let's just first read it. Could I get rid of that? And then I could say labels equal ticket labels. So we're just going to run this one step at a time. Yeah, that still works. Next, can we inline it? All right, give it a run. Yeah, small refactors. This is the way we did things back in my day. Now, by the way, if you're thinking, why can't we just do something like unset labels label? That's because of the structure that I have set up for the labels. But instead, we could treat it like a collection here. And rather than reject, we might even filter it down. Filter down the label where the label does not equal the lowercase form of the passed-in label. We're going to rekey them, so that's why we call values, and then we convert that back to an array. You could even do to array if that's more clear to you. Anyways, we're just making little changes, but the entire time I can refactor with the assurance. I could even tweak this further, ticket labels equal that, and then just simply call ticket save at the end if you like that more. Did that break anything? No, that test is still passing. And in fact, if I switch back, let's run all the tests, and those are passing as well. You get the idea. So here's the point. If you're working with AI, it's going to generate a lot of code that you're not necessarily going over with a fine-tooth comb. You will supervise it, you will make sure it's following the right structure, but you're not reading every single line the way you might have done a couple years ago. So for that reason alone, tests are essential. They cannot be skipped. And if AI does skip them, go back and tell them to fill in the blanks. It's needed. All right, tell me if I'm close at all. My guess is you read and learned about Git Worktrees many years ago, and then you proceeded to completely forget about them. Am I right? I bet I am. Well, now I think you'll find with multiple AI agents, actually, Git Worktrees are wildly useful. Let me show you. So here we are once again within the Laravel Workshop repository. And if I scroll down, you'll see in the README, we have a list of just potential additions and features that you might add on your own. One of them is related to bookmarking. Okay, so let's imagine we wanted to work on this, but also there's other stuff we want to work on simultaneously that is not related to bookmarking. How do we deal with this? Well, traditionally, of course, we would check out a branch, right? So you might do something like this. You might say git check out a branch called bookmarking. Here, you would work on your various changes. And then, yeah, if you ever need to switch back and work on a different branch or on master, you could stash your changes, or you could do a work in progress commit, and then you would switch back to your main branch, and you're fine. And this works, and this is how we traditionally do it. But things are a little different now that AI agents are included, right? Imagine you have two different AI agents that are working on totally different features. How do we deal with that, right? Do we set up two tabs? For example, do I boot up Claude here, and then I also have maybe Junie running here? Do we do those concurrently? Well, we could try, but there's probably going to be some overlap, right? One agent changes this file, and the other agent deletes the file entirely. Like, we don't want to do this, right? So what's the solution? How can I work on the code, but then also have two agents also working on the code, but also there's no interference? Well, you can't really do it with a simple branching like this. Instead, we need to set up a dedicated work tree. Now, definition alert, very, very quick. A work tree is nothing more than a separate directory that points to the same Git history. And that's it. That's all there is to it. But the cool thing is you could have as many of these separate directories as you want. You could even have one per agent. Hint, hint. So let's imagine, let's say I'm working on the code base, but then it occurs to me, you know what? I wish an agent could work on this bookmarking feature. And I wish I didn't have to just pause and wait for it to finish before I feel comfortable interacting with the code base again. So instead, I'm going to create a work tree, and I'm going to switch to that new directory, and I'm going to boot up my agent, and it will get started. And then I can keep working with the assurance that there's no interference or collision. But then, a minute later as I'm working, I'm thinking, you know what? It would be cool if we could also implement this highlights feature, but I don't want to work on it, and agent number one is busy. Maybe I could create a work tree and have a second agent booted up in its own workspace effectively, and it can work on this feature. So now we have three features being worked on simultaneously, once again with the assurance that there's no collision or overlap in the entire process. That is what work trees allow for. Let me show you. Open the terminal and run git worktree add and specify a path to where this new directory will live. Generally, it'll be a sibling, right? So we go up a level, and a common convention is to use the same folder name, -- and then whatever the branch or the feature happens to be. So in our case, if we are working on bookmarking, we might do this. And then as a general good rule, I would recommend always create a branch in the process. And I'll tell you why that's helpful shortly. So let's also call the branch bookmarking. All right, so now we have a new work tree. So check this out. If I were to cd into the parent directory, I will now have a new workshop bookmarking folder. So you see what I mean? It is a separate directory, but it still points to the same Git history. As you can see here, we have some work in progresses, refactoring queries. It's the same Git history. Okay, so this is really cool. And then also, if I were to go back to my main project, I want you to notice if I run git branch, of course, we're going to have that bookmarking branch available here. So that's a key thing to understand. It's still a branch, but in our case with the work tree points to that branch. And the branch doesn't even care that that separate directory exists or not. It's irrelevant. Okay, so that means if I were to remove the work tree, the branch would still exist. That's very important to comprehend. Let's cd into Laravel Workshop Bookmarking and open this in PhpStorm. All right, so pay attention. We are now within the bookmarking work tree and also the branch, as you can see right here. So now, yeah, just proceed as usual to implement the feature. So if you're using an agent, you could boot up the Jetbrains AI. In this case, maybe you want to use Junie, and you could start on your plan. In this case, let's keep it very, very micro. I'm working on a bookmarking feature. To start, I just want you to create the migration and eloquent model for a bookmark. A user can bookmark a post, so we need to make sure we store that information. All right, a little vague, but this is enough to illustrate the point. Let's get started. All right, so Junie's working on the plan. Let's run the commands. All right, and it's done. So in this case, we can see it created a handful of files, as you see right here. This is our bookmark. We have a bookmark factory. Again, we don't really care about the code in this example, but it's great. No problem here. Okay, so now think about it. The agent is working on this project, but simultaneously, I could have been working on the main project. Let me show you. Let's switch back to the original Laravel workshop folder. All right, and we're back. And yeah, of course, notice there's not going to be any reference to our bookmark files, of course. Okay, but now, yeah, if we want to pull it in, just merge it like you always do. You could say git merge bookmarking. Because again, it's just a branch, and Git doesn't care that it's pointing to that separate folder. It's irrelevant, right? And in fact, just to show it to you, if I were to remove that work tree entirely, I could say git work tree remove and then provide a path. So that was what? Laravel workshop bookmarking. Okay, now it's gone, but of course the branch still lives. So I could check out the bookmarking branch, and now we have access to all of the bookmark model and all of those files. It's just a checked out branch, but in the case of a work tree, it exists within a different directory. So cool, right? Okay, so now I just want to wrap up by showing you a few caveats that you should be aware of, especially in the case of Laravel. Let's go. Let's boot up the terminal. We'll switch back to our main branch. And in fact, let's just delete bookmarking entirely. And yeah, let's do this. Let's create a new work tree from scratch. So git work tree add, and then once again, we'll do Laravel workshop bookmarking. And I'm going to check out a branch in the process. Okay, so now, yeah, we're going to have this new directory, right? And because we're using Herd or Laravel Valet potentially, well, we should be able to just access this directly within the browser, right? And it should just work, right? Well, let's see. All right, so if we visit that worktree folder name.test, which is the convention for Herd, but if we take a look, it fails. We get some reference to vendor/autoload. Now you may know, oh, that means we need to run composer install. And that makes perfect sense, right? This is an in-version control. So when we create a new working directory, we would have to go through those usual steps. All right, so these are things we need to keep a mental note of. And of course, we can automate this process as a bash script. Let's keep going. I'm going to cd into that work tree or that workspace. We're going to run composer install, and we'll say check. That's something we need to do each time. All right, switch back, give it a refresh, and now we get a server error. All right, that's kind of weird. So let's see what the issue might be. let's switch over to that project. All right, and again, pay attention to the menu to remember which workspace we are in. Let's go into laravel.log. We get no application key has been specified. And further, if I open up the sidebar, you'll notice we don't even have an env file. So we need to create the environment file, and then we also need to generate the key. And as it turns out, there's a couple other things you have to do as part of a Laravel setup. So check this out. If I go into composer.json, if I scroll down to the script section, you'll see that there are some hooks that will automatically fire when we create a project through Composer. Take a look at this one. After you create a project, generate the key, set up the database.sqlite file, and then run your migrations. And then there's also one called post root package install. So again, these will run automatically in certain situations, but in our case, we could also just trigger them manually like this. Composer run. All right, so that creates the environment file, and now I have access to that. Cool. Next, we could run this one. Composer run, paste that in. All right, generates the key, creates the database, runs the migrations. Now if I switch back, we're getting closer. We've changed the error. Now it can't find the Vite manifest. That would make sense. We haven't built our dependencies yet. So once again, I would install my dependencies. And then let's also run npm run production to build them. Or I'm sorry, what is it? I can't remember. Mine's different from my main project. npm run build. That's right, it was changed. Okay, so now let's cross our fingers, come back, and there we go. Now it seems to be working. And yeah, that's just what you would do. If you encounter anything where it's like, oh, this bootstrap cache directory doesn't exist, then you make a mental note to update your bash script to always do that whenever you prepare a new work tree. So why don't we wrap up by having AI generate one of these for us. Let's start up a new chat. This time, just for variety, we'll use the Claude agent. So let's say, I want you to help me write a bash script that is responsible for creating a new Git work tree for a Laravel app. As you may know, there's a number of commands that need to be run in order to configure the Laravel app. So the bash script should create the work tree and then also run those commands in the process. All right, so let's say it needs to run composer install, npm install, then composer run post root package install, and that just sets up the environment file. It will also manually run post create project that will, again, configure the database and run the migrations. And again, I can't quite remember, but I think we might need to make a storage cache directory. I can't quite remember, though, so we can come back to that later. Finally, I'm going to finish up by saying my workflow. Preferred workflow. In current project, I run bin/worktree feature, and that will create a new project name --feature worktree. It will then cd there and run the commands above. Yeah, just something like that to get us going. Okay, so now it's going to generate a bash script for us that we can use. All right, that was super quick. Why don't we view unified? And let's see. All right, so it's set up as a bash script. We store some variables here, like the name of the project, the name of the work tree, following the convention of -- branch. It will have some logging. It runs git work tree add just like we did. Go into the new folder name, set up the branch, then configure the Laravel app. This actually looks super nice. Of course, next, because we have a bash script, we need it to be executable. So we run this typical one. You've likely done this many times. And it's done. So we should now have access to this script. Let's test it out. I'm excited. Now, in this case, we're already within a work tree, which I don't love. Okay, let's do this real quick. Let's grab work tree, and I'm going to switch back to my main project to simulate us starting from scratch. Here we go. All right, sorry about that. So very quickly, let's add a bin directory, and then within there, we'll add a file called worktree, and then I'll paste that in. Okay, now very quickly, we would commit that. And now we should, after I set the permissions, we should be able to very easily create a new work tree for a Laravel project that will take care of all of the annoying setup steps. All right, let's go. Bin worktree. And what feature are we working on now? How about README? How about highlights? Okay, git worktree highlights. All right, yep, take a look. It creates the worktree. It installs all of the dependencies. Worktree created successfully. This is great. So now, for example, if I were to cd here, list the files, of course, the environment file should already exist, among other things. Like right there it is. Everything's been configured for us. And then further, we should be able to access this directory in the browser, and herd, of course, will do its magic. So we want workshopping, and we call this highlights. Oh, and it fails. We forgot to run our build. Okay, that's fine. We can come back, npm run build. I knew I forgot something. Come back, refresh. Yeah, that's working. So yeah, the final step, of course, we could return to our bin and then update this to also run. We'll do it right here. Building the assets, npm run build. Yeah, that was the missing step we forgot. But yeah, mostly this is just a simple bash script. And the important thing is to understand what exactly happens when you add and remove a worktree. Tell me what you think. All right, I'm going to warn you. This next thing I'm about to show you is wild. You're not going to believe it. Okay, so this is called the Ralph Wiggum technique after the Simpsons character. And I don't even want to tell you what it is right now. I just want to show you. Check this out. For Laracasts, let's say I have a handful of tasks and issues that need to get done. Why don't we store those within a markdown file like tasks.md, but they could just as easily be issues on GitHub. Okay, let me paste this in. And these are actual things I need to get done. All right, so we retired thumbnails for topics. So we just want to find any lingering references to the thumbnail, whether it's in a Nova resource or a Vue component, and clear it out. Next, when we fetch our categories, we normally sort them by series count. But let's say we want to promote the DevOps category, and we want that one to always be at the top. Let's implement that. All right, standard stuff. Now, I could manually copy these into an agent, but it would be cool if it could just read these and one after the other, knock them out. So let's figure out how. In full screen, in my sidebar, let's create a new shell script within my bin directory. We'll call it Ralph. Now, of course, this is going to be a shell script, and ultimately our script is going to run Claude, right? But let me save ourselves some keystrokes by pasting this in. All right, so we're going to run Claude, and I'll set the permissions mode. Now, if you're in a container or you live dangerously, then you can dangerously skip permissions, but we're not going to do that in this case. OK, so now we have a here doc with a multi-line string, and this is our prompt. So just run Claude and pass it this prompt. All right, step 1, read the markdown file. Got it. Step 2, choose one, emphasis on one task, and implement it. Great. Step 3, commit your change. Step 4, update the task file and document the changes, basically, within a progress section. All right, let's add that now. Progress, and we'll get it started here. And yeah, at least for an initial proof of concept, this would work. Now keep in mind, we're not in a loop yet, but yeah, the core action is in place here. Okay, so the key thing I want you to be aware of, bring it in. The key thing is that Ralph is focusing on one thing at a time. It's not working through all of those tasks as part of the same process in the same context. It's doing one thing and then it's done. Okay, so yeah, in real life, I would have information here about testing and formatting. So why don't we tweak this a little bit? Okay, so a slight tweak, but better. Let's have a look. Read the markdown file, find a suitable incomplete task and implement it, and you can only work on one. That's very important. Next, include tests where practical, and then run our suite, and you are not done until it returns green. And that's a really important hook for agents. Give it something to verify completion. Next, run our formatter that does rector and PhpStorm, commit your changes, and document what you did, and you're done. And yeah, really, that's it. So keep in mind, we're not in a loop yet, but the core action here is solid. Let's give it a shot. Let's switch back to 2UP. Hi again. Let's open up the terminal. I'm going to do a quick work in progress for our plan. And then let's run our script. But of course, we can't execute it until we modify it. So let's make it executable. Then Ralph. And here we go. Let's go. And we're done. It's crazy, right? It's wild. And if I run git log, here is the commit. And if I take a look at the plan, here's the progress it made. Okay, so that is a single run. But now imagine we're in a loop, and it can run 10 or 20 times to knock out every single issue or task that you have. I'll show you. Let's run it one more time. Then Ralph. All right, so it consumes it. Notice it's using the same prompt over and over. That's the entire point. All right, it can tell that this one has been completed. So now it's going to start working on the second task, and I'm not going to let that complete. You get the gist. Okay, so now let's put it within a loop. Okay, so now I effectively want to keep this Claude call, but have it run endlessly, or at least seemingly endlessly. So why don't we start by wrapping it within a while statement. While true, then do this. Yeah, and actually in this case, you know what? I think it's squawking. I may have an issue with spaces and tabs. Let's just turn that off entirely and then bring it back. Yeah, okay, so now we're calling Claude endlessly. And that's not good. Even if there's nothing else to do, it just keeps running over and over and over. So we need some kind of exit ramp. Let's see how. All right, let's add one more item here. If there are no remaining tasks, create a file. And this can be anything you want. It doesn't matter. It's just a flag. It's a hook to tell us, okay, we're done here. We can exit out of the loop. Okay, so now check this out. Let's check. Do we have a file and what is it? Ralph complete. If so, then we're done, right? Then we can exit 0, and that will exit out of the loop. Why don't we also say echo, all tasks are now complete. And then let's clean up after ourselves. And yeah, we're done. So yeah, this file-based approach has a couple benefits. So we run Claude continuously until that file exists. If it does, that is our hook that we can exit out of the loop, and we're done with all of the tasks. Now here's an issue though. We want to handle a scenario where something goes wrong and maybe this never gets created, and then Claude just runs on an endless loop potentially through the night. Why don't we have a limit here, a little bit of protection? At most, we can go through the loop 10 or 20 times, whatever you want. In that case, we should swap out the while with the for. Let's have Junie help us. Add some context. When I run this script, I want to set a maximum number of loops that are permitted. So I'd like to swap out the while true with a for loop, and that will reference the number of iterations that I pass in. For example, 10. Let's go. All right, that was done super quickly. All right, so now we can pass through iterations, and we go up to that number. Again, that's just, it's a fail-safe. Okay, so now why don't we specify how many loops it took at the end? Update, and include the number of loops it took to get here. All right, that's done, and it just added that. Okay, I thought it might do something fancier. Okay, so I want to try this out. So let's go through the entire workflow. I have tasks.md. I specify all of the issues or things that I want the agent to work on. Next, I have our Ralph script. This is going to loop over a maximum number of times that I pass in, maybe 10 or 20. And for each loop, it's going to run Claude and figure out one item that it can tackle. Now, if it gets to the point where there's nothing left to work on, then it will create this file, and that is our exit ramp to kill the loop and be done. Okay, I'm ready to try this out. Then Ralph, and expand. All right, get your popcorn. All right, so it decided to work on the first task, but it didn't have to. Okay, so this is done, but real quick, notice it doesn't automatically continue on to the next task, but that's only because we're running this in interactive mode effectively so that we can view the output. But you can turn that off and then it instantly moves on to the next item. For now, though, we would have to exit out of the agent and then it will continue the loop, as you see in just a second. All right, and now it moves on to number 2. So yeah, while this is finishing up, keep that in mind. It's just a trade-off. If you want the full interactive mode where you're viewing all of the processing in real time, well, then you're going to have to manually close it out after each loop. But once you're comfortable and things are working flawlessly, switch over to non-interactive mode. And it's done. So we should now have 2 commits for all of that work. And if I return to our tasks, both of these are complete. OK, so now I just want to wrap up with 2 or 3 little notes to be aware of. Let's return to our shell script. When you feel ready, turn on print or non-interactive mode. And yeah, this will get you around the issue where you have to manually exit out of Claude in order to continue the loop. So keep it off while you're getting your feet wet, figuring out what's going on, and then turn it on. Next, in terms of permissions, again, if you're within a Docker container or you just like living dangerously, then you can turn on the dangerously skip permissions flag so that it will never prompt you. Otherwise, though, you need to make sure that you pre-approve any permissions that it might request in non-interactive mode. Otherwise, it'll just hang indefinitely. So here's what you can do. If you go into your Claude, and you should have a settings.local.json file, this specifies all of the permissions that you've approved. And I would recommend things like this. Make sure it can do git add and commit and check out and branch. If you're fine with it making a PR or a push, then include those as well, or simply approve all git commands. We're going to approve the Jetbrains MCP server, the Laravel boost, any of the commands it runs there. I want it to run Composer, so I allow those. I want it to run Pest. Just pre-approve anything that you are OK with it running, and then you should avoid any scenario where it makes a request to do something. But otherwise, yeah, again, do it in interactive mode for a little bit so that you can approve everything that's needed. OK, so here's the reality. It goes much further than this. There are some pretty crazy things you can do. Just imagine a situation where you have an agent that works through all of the issues in your GitHub repository. There's a risk, obviously, but it's also so incredibly cool. So there's more to share. Keep it locked to Laracasts, and I'll be sure to show you.